Hi guys and welcome to Lost Light Radio channel. Tonight we step into a world of deep snow, black pine trees, and a lonely cabin crouched under the weight of the coldest winter America has ever known. What kind of person chooses to sleep out here, where the wind feels alive and the night can freeze a bucket solid before dawn? What secrets does a frontier cabin keep when the fire is low, the shutters tremble, and the wilderness presses close from every side? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, and you arrive just as the last light drains from the sky. The cabin stands in a small clearing, half buried in drifts that have hardened like carved stone. Snow clings to the roof in thick layers. Frost rims the tiny windows until they look blind and pale. The logs of the walls are dark with age, with seams stuffed tight with old clay, moss, and whatever else a careful hand once found to keep the wind out. You pause a few steps away, boots sinking with a soft crunch, and stare at the only promise of comfort for miles around. The air is so cold it seems to ring. You draw a breath through your scarf and feel it bite the inside of your nose. The smell here is sharp and clean, like split pine, frozen earth, and distant smoke. Far above, the sky has turned the colour of iron. A thin moon hangs there, brittle as a chip of bone. The pines along the edge of the clearing sway in a slow, dark rhythm, and their branches shed powdery curtains of snow with each passing gust. Nothing in this landscape welcomes carelessness. That, you quickly understand, was the first lesson of winter on the frontier. People who crossed into the American West often feared raids, hunger, or getting lost, but winter cold was its own ruthless enemy. During some 19th century cold waves, temperatures plunged far below what new settlers expected, especially across the plains and mountain territories. Weather records from that era are uneven, and scholars still debate which season deserves the title of the coldest in American history, but no one argues about the result. Cabins froze, livestock vanished under drifts, rivers slowed under ice. Human plans became very small. You climb the porch steps, if porch is not too grand a word for 3 rough planks and a roof lip loaded with snow. The wood under your boots groans like an old sleeper disturbed from a dream. Your gloved hand reaches for the latch. Even the metal feels hostile, a hard little shock of cold through the leather. You push the door inward and a breath of stale darkness meets you. The cabin smells of ashes, old timber and wool. You stand still for a moment and let your eyes adjust. The room is one square space with a loft above, hardly more than a platform for blankets and storage. There is a narrow table by the wall, a stool with one repaired leg, 2 pegs holding a heavy coat and a lantern, and a bed frame stuffed with a ticking mattress that looks as though comfort has visited it only rarely. At the far end sits the hearth, built from rough stone, blackened by years of smoke. Beside it lies a neat stack of split wood and a small iron pot. You're already grateful for whoever last left things orderly. That was no small virtue in the Wild West. Frontier cabins were often built fast, improved slowly, and trusted completely. In many parts of the American West, especially during mining rushes and settlement booms, cabins could begin as one-room shelters raised with local timber, sod, or even dugout walls cut into a hillside. Fancy design was not the point. Survival was a tight roof, a dry floor, and a fireplace that did not smoke too badly were luxury enough. You set down your pack and kneel before the hearth. The ashes are cold on top but still hold a faint memory of heat lower down. Someone banked the fire well before leaving or sleeping elsewhere. You place kindling carefully, then a few narrow sticks, then 2 larger splits on top. Your fingers are stiff, almost foolish with cold, and every small task demands patience. Flint strikes steel, a spark falls, another. Then a thread of flame curls through the shavings like a waking creature testing its limbs. You watch it catch. It is hard not to love fire when you have spent an hour in this cold. The little flames nibble upward, first uncertain, then bolder, as if they have remembered their profession. Orange light spreads across the hearthstones, licking the iron pot, touching the walls, finding the corners one by one. Shadows leap upward to the rafters. The room, which a moment ago felt abandoned and suspicious, begins to seem almost human again. The sound is small but glorious. Crackling wood, a whisper of pulling draught, a faint pop of sap in the grain. Frontier people knew those sounds intimately. A good fire was not a decorative thing. It meant hot food, melted snow, dried socks, thawed fingers, and a better chance of waking alive. In severe winters, many families rose during the night to feed the flames because letting the fire die could mean misery by dawn. Some even slept in caps indoors, wrapped in quilts, buffalo robes, or anything thick enough to hold a little warmth near the skin. You remove your gloves and hold your hands toward the blaze. Needles of pain prick your fingers as life returns. Your cheeks sting. Your boots steam faintly at the toes where packed snow begins to soften. The warmth does not fill the room all at once. It gathers close to the hearth, making a little island of mercy while the far walls remain cool and stern. Still, it is enough to settle something in your chest. Outside, the wind presses at the shutters. The cabin answers with a dry creak in the rafters. It is an old sound, almost conversational. Timbers shrink in cold. Nails complain. The whole structure seems to clear its throat now and then, as if reminding you that it too is working hard tonight. You glance at the window. Frost feathers spread across the glass in delicate white ferns. Historians continue to argue about how often isolated settlers truly endured complete winter solitude, because diaries vary and memory loves drama, but there were certainly cabins where one person, or one family, listened to these exact noises with no neighbour close enough to help. You add another stick to the fire and begin to inspect the rest of the room with practical eyes. On the shelf are a tin cup, a coffee pot, a sack with a few beans, and a crock of salt pork sealed with cloth. Near the door hangs a snow shovel and a pair of rawhide snowshoes. In one corner sits a wash basin with a film of ice skimming the surface. That detail is very frontier, very honest. Indoor plumbing was a fantasy here. Even washing could become a negotiation with weather and courage. Cold had a way of entering every task. Cooking took longer. Water had to be hauled or snow melted. Bread dough rose poorly. Ink thickened. Candle wax hardened. Some settlers complained that boots left too near the door would freeze stiff, while boots left too close to the hearth might crack when they dried. There is even a quirky old belief from various cold regions that loud whistling indoors could call stronger wind down the chimney. Whether anyone here believed that is impossible to say, but on a night like this you understand why people preferred not to tempt the unseen. You hang your coat on a peg, roll your shoulders, and feel how tired your body has become without announcing it. Travel in winter is sly that way. The cold does not always strike like a hammer. Sometimes it works patiently, draining strength with each mile, making you clumsy, quiet, and slower to think. You rub your arms, then cross to the table where a tallow candle waits in a stubby holder. One touch from the hearth kindles it. Its flame is softer than the fire, buttery and still, and it adds a second layer of warmth to the room, the emotional kind. Now the cabin looks almost cosy, not pretty in the modern sense, not polished, not curated for a photograph with a neat blanket draped just so. This is working coziness, frontier coziness, the kind earned by being less cold than the world outside. The table is scarred, the walls leak of faint draughts in hidden places. The floorboards are uneven and gritty with old dust, yet the light softens all of it. Firelight is kind to rough things. You take the iron pot, scoop in some snow from a bucket by the door, and set it near the flames to melt. The snow sinks into itself with surprising speed, turning from a heaped white pile into a shallow pool, then asking for more. That trick of winter can be slightly insulting. You gather half a pot of snow and receive a few inches of water in return. Frontier households knew this well. Melting snow was useful, but it took time and fuel, and neither was ever free. The smell of wet iron rises gently. You sit on the stool or pull your feet nearer the hearth and let silence settle. It is never complete silence. The fire talks. The wind scrapes a branch across the outer wall. Somewhere above, powder slips from the roof with a muffled hush. From the forest comes a distant cracking sound. Perhaps a limb splitting under frost. Extreme cold can do that. Trees sometimes break with a report like a gunshot, startling enough to make tired travellers imagine all sorts of frontier drama when the culprit is merely a very cold trunk giving up. You listen more carefully now. That is another habit winter teaches. Listen for changes. Listen for a chimney drawing badly, for a hinge rattling loose, for the scrape of something alive under the floor, for the sudden absence of wind that can mean heavier weather building in the dark. People on the frontier became skilled readers of tiny signs because they had to. A modern thermostat tells you a number, a cabin tells you a story, and you must learn its language. The water in the pot begins to tremble. You add a pinch of coffee, more for comfort than strength, and the scent slowly lifts into the room, rich and bitter, mixing with wood smoke and pine resin. For a moment, the cabin smells almost festive. Coffee on the frontier was treasured, stretched, substituted, and sometimes faked with roasted grains when supplies ran short. But when the real thing was available, it offered more than caffeine. It offered morale, which in winter was almost as valuable. You pour a little into the tin cup and cradle it in both hands. The metal is hot enough to make you smile. You sip carefully. It is rough coffee, smoky and over-strong, but at this hour and in this place it tastes magnificent. The warmth slides into you and seems to find all the hollow places the cold had made. Your shoulders begin to unclench. The room, however, never lets you forget reality. Along the floor, a whisper of cold still moves. The far corner remains dim. The loft above is lost in thick shadow. Many frontier cabins had no insulation beyond packed earth, chinking and hope. Some were snug, many were not. A fireplace warmed the nearby air well enough, yet nights often stayed cold enough inside for breath to show. You suspect this cabin will be that sort. Charming, yes. Forgiving, absolutely not. You rise and check the door bar, then the shutters. Each fastening is simple, but solid. That matters. Wildlife did occasionally prowl near cabins, especially when snow deepened and forage grew scarce. Wolves inspired the most stories, not always the most accurate ones. In truth, they usually wanted easier meals than a determined human with fire, but their howls travelled beautifully through winter dark, and that alone was enough to stir old instincts in the spine. For now, though, no howl comes, only the wind, only the fire, only the steady knowledge that night has fully taken the clearing, the trees, the white ground, the cabin, and you. There is a peculiar peace in that. You're not dominating this landscape. You're borrowing a corner of it, keeping warm by intelligence, labour, and a bit of luck. That was the frontier arrangement at its most honest. You feed another log to the hearth. Sparks spin upward, brief little stars that vanish in the chimney throat. The cabin brightens, and the warmth reaches a touch farther across the floorboards. You pull the stool closer, stretch your hands to the blaze, and let your tired eyes rest on the shifting gold and amber light. Outside is a continent of snow and frozen dark. Inside is one small room, one careful fire, one person breathing easier. Tonight that is enough. The fire has found its confidence now, and the cabin begins to breathe with steadier rhythm. Heat gathers low and bright around the hearthstones, spreading in slow waves that soften the cruel edge of the evening. You can feel the difference on your face first, then in your hands, then deep in your boots where your toes have been negotiating with numbness for far too long. The room is still cold enough to remind you where you are, but it has stopped feeling hostile. It feels watchful instead, like an old place deciding whether you're worth sheltering. You kneel beside your pack and unpack the small treasures that matter in winter. A folded wool blanket, a twist of dried meat, a heel of bread wrapped in cloth, a little tin of matches kept carefully dry, a spare pair of socks. Frontier life made experts of ordinary objects. A blanket was not just bedding, it was wall, coat, curtain, and comfort. Dry socks were close to a spiritual experience. A match, when the weather turned vicious, could feel more valuable than a silver coin. You set the blanket near the fire to warm. That simple act fills the room with a faint sheepy smell. Warm lanolin rising from the wool as if the cloth itself remembers fields and rain. The scent mingles with wood smoke and coffee until the cabin carries the kind of atmosphere that makes tired muscles surrender. You tug off your boots, one at a time, and the relief is immediate. Your feet ache with returning heat. The socks underneath are damp from melted snow, so you peel them off and drape them over a chair back near the fire. Steam lifts from them in thin, ghostly ribbons. Warmth makes you notice the small pains. Your shoulders complain from carrying weight. Your calves feel tight. The skin on your knuckles is rough and dry from cold air. Even your ears have that strange, fragile tenderness that follows a hard wind. On the frontier, people learned that getting warm was not one dramatic moment. It happened by degrees. First hands, then face, then feet, then mood. Spirits rose one careful inch at a time. You take the bread and dried meat to the table, then glance at the salt pork on the shelf. That wins. Tonight calls for something hot and heavy. You cut a few thick pieces, drop them into the iron pot, and listen as the fat begins to hiss and sputter. The smell arrives quickly, rich and savoury, filling every corner of the cabin with promise. It is not delicate cooking. Nothing here is delicate, but it is exactly the kind of food that suits a winter night in a log room hemmed in by snow. Soon the pot is singing. Grease spits softly. A curl of steam rolls upward. You crumble a little bread into the bottom to catch the drippings and stretch the meal. Practical habits like that turned up all over frontier kitchens. Waste was something only comfortable people could afford. Bones became broth. Old coffee grounds might be reused, and stale bread was never truly finished until it had surrendered every possible use. Even candle ends could be melted down and made to serve again. You sit close to the fire while the pork cooks, and your body settles into a rare luxury stillness. Outside, movement belongs to the wind and trees. Inside, you finally get to stop. The quiet has changed since the fire grew stronger. Earlier it felt empty. Now it feels inhabited. The crackle from the hearth fills the gaps between larger sounds. Occasionally a log shifts with a bright collapse of coals, and a pulse of orange light sweeps across the floorboards. It is a very handsome room in this light. The knots in the timber gleam like dark eyes. Resin shines in old seams. The tallow candle on the table gives a patient amber glow that smooths the harshest edges. Even the patched stool looks almost dignified. Firelight is a democratic artist. It flatters rough wood, cheap metal, plain pottery, and tired faces with the same generous hand. No wonder people once gathered around it for work, prayer, gossip, mending, and stories. A hearth was the centre of more than warmth. It was the centre of being together, even when together meant only your own company. You stir the pot with a spoon and taste the broth that has formed. Salty, fatty, almost alarmingly sincere, perfect. You eat slowly from the iron cup, balancing it in both hands for warmth between bites. The hot food settles into you with a comforting weight. Frontier diaries often mention how much better morale became after a warm meal, even if the meal itself was plain. Historians know a great deal about winter hardship from these ordinary records. though there is still debate over how representative they are. People were more likely to write when things went dramatically wrong, which means a cheerful evening by the fire may have been common, and simply less likely to be recorded. That feels unfair to pleasant evenings. They deserved historians too. You smile at the thought and spoon up the last of the broth. The salt lingers on your lips. The warmth in your stomach spreads outward and joins the heat from the fire, until your whole body feels less like a collection of cold parts and more like one person again. You wipe the cup with the final bit of bread and decide not to feel guilty about enjoying this so much. Pleasure on the frontier was rarely extravagant. It often came in modest forms: dry boots, a full belly, a draft-free corner, an extra blanket. You pour the remaining coffee into the cup and sit on the floor near the hearth. Blanket over your shoulders. The boards are hard beneath you, but the wool is warm now, and that changes everything. Its weight settles across your back with a deep, grounding pressure. The texture is slightly scratchy at the neck, softening lower down where the fabric has worn smooth from use. You tuck the edges around your knees and watch sparks rise whenever a log cracks open. The cabin has its own little climate. Closest to the fire, it is pleasantly warm. Near the table, it is merely tolerable. At the far wall, it remains loyal to winter. This unevenness shaped how people arranged their lives indoors. Beds were pushed toward the best heat. Infants were bundled and placed carefully away from drafts. Wet clothes migrated toward warm zones. Food that must not freeze stayed close to the hearth, while anything meant to last in the cold might be left in an unheated corner. A cabin taught geography in inches. Your fingers trace the rim of the tin cup. It is dented in 2 places and slightly out of round, the kind of item that has survived being dropped, packed, and used hard without complaint. That was another frontier virtue. Fragile beauty had little chance here. Durable ugliness often lived a long and honourable life. Still, people did make room for touches of charm. Some cabins had braided rugs, painted boxes, pressed flowers tucked into books, or china cups carried west despite every warning that they would break. Human beings are very stubborn about beauty. One quirky custom from cold rural communities comes to mind as you sit there wrapped in wool. Some people once believed that sleeping with a piece of onion in your pocket could help keep off winter sickness. Others swore by camphor bags, goose grease, or vinegar tonics fierce enough to wake the dead. Medical ideas on the frontier mixed folk knowledge, half science, improvisation, and desperation in fascinating proportions. Some remedies had practical merit, some had only confidence. In a blizzard, though, confidence itself might count for something. The fire settles lower, turning from tall flames to glowing work. You add 2 new logs and hear them begin their slow conversation with the coals. Resin pops, bark curls. The fresh wood brings a sharper scent, green and sweet beneath the smoke. You can almost imagine the tree standing outside somewhere in another season, though that takes some effort with the window now buried in frost lace and darkness. There is something hypnotic about tending a fire. Each small motion matters, but none of it can be rushed. Lay the wood badly and the flame sulks. Feed it well and it rewards you with steadiness. You understand why people grew attached to particular hearths. A good fireplace had personality. Some drew beautifully in any weather. Some smoked whenever the wind shifted. Some liked thinner wood at first and thicker wood later. Some required a cracked door for proper draught. Cabins and people learned one another through winter. A newcomer might curse the quirks. A resident would shrug and say, in effect, yes, that is how this place is. Do try to keep up. You rise and walk the room barefoot in your dry socks, feeling the boards with careful steps. The floor is warmer near the hearth and cooler by the bed. A draught threads down from the loft. You fetch the warmed blanket and spread it over the mattress, then pat the ticking to see how lumpy the stuffing has become. Corn husk, straw, or feather beds each had their own peculiarities, but this one feels like it may contain all 3 plus several opinions. You laugh softly and decide it will do. It will absolutely do. Sleep on the frontier was rarely luxurious. Beds might be shared, lofts crowded, mattresses thin, blankets insufficient, and pillows improvised from folded clothing. Yet exhaustion is a remarkable decorator. It can turn a rough bunk into a welcome palace, or as tonight, with the cabin closed against the wind and the hearth alive. Even a lumpy bed seems generous. You return to the hearth and pull the stool closer, then set your boots where they can dry without scorching. That balance matters. Leather left too near a hot fire could shrink, stiffen, or crack. And there are few things sadder in winter than ruining your own boots by loving warmth too much. Frontier people knew this from hard experience. They also knew the misery of frozen bootlaces, icy buckles, and soles that let in water one slow step at a time. Dry footwear was never a trivial blessing. Outside, snow whispers against the walls. The sound is subtle, more brushing than striking, as if the storm is testing the cabin with careful fingers. You imagine flakes sifting through the dark and settling over tracks, stumps, rocks, and hidden drifts until the whole clearing becomes one smooth white shape. Winter does this magic trick constantly. It simplifies the world by covering it, then complicates it by making every path uncertain. Distance becomes deceptive. Fences disappear. Trails wander off into blankness like unfinished thoughts. Inside, the candle burns lower. Its little pool of melted tallow shines like pale honey. You pinch the wick to shorten it and the flame steadies again. Tasks like that seem very small now, but they were part of the nightly rhythm of homes before electric light. Trimming wicks, banking fires, checking latches, setting out extra wood, making sure water would not freeze solid by morning. Comfort came from routine. Routine came from memory. Memory, in cold weather, could be the difference between a manageable night and a miserable one. You decide to prepare properly. You fill the kettle again with melted snow and set it close to the hearth for later. You stack more split wood within easy reach. You shake out your second pair of socks and place them near the bed. You fold your coat to use as an extra layer if needed. Each action feels sensible and calming. Preparation has a soothing effect because it turns anxiety into movement. Instead of worrying about the coldest hours, you build small defences against them, one object at a time. There is satisfaction in that. The frontier was full of dramatic stories, but much of survival depended on plain habits practiced without applause. A person who chopped enough wood before dark, patched a leak when it was noticed, and kept dry, kindling under cover might seem less exciting than a gunslinger in a dime novel. Yet one of these people was considerably more likely to see spring. The mythology of the West loved noise. Winter respected competence. You settle back into the stool with the blanket around your shoulders again and let your eyes wander. The rafters overhead are striped with soot. The pegs by the door cast long, slanting shadows. The spoon on the table flashes briefly whenever the fire stirs. In the corner sits a wooden box with a cracked lid, and on top of it a simple object you somehow missed before a small fiddle, missing one string. That detail changes the room. Suddenly this is not just a shelter, but a place where someone once sat on a night like this, and drew music from horsehair and wood while the storm worked outside. Frontier cabins held more music than people sometimes assume. Fiddles, harmonicas, flutes, and human voices travelled light enough to follow wagon roads and mining camps. Music could lift a mood, pace a dance, or make loneliness feel briefly shared. Even one damaged instrument hints at evenings fuller than this silent one. You do not touch it. Some things deserve to be left at rest. Instead, you lean closer to the flames and watch a pocket of sap burst in a bright star of orange. The fire answers with a warm gust against your shins. Your eyelids have begun to feel pleasantly heavy. Not sleepy enough for bed yet, but no longer sharpened by travel and cold. The cabin has worked its quiet spell on you. Food, fire, wool, and shelter have joined forces. They are very persuasive. You take one last slow sip of cooling coffee and listen to the room. It answers with the softest sounds. A coal settling inward, a board ticking as it warms, wind moving past the chimney top in a low, breathy hum, the kind of sounds that make a person stay still and simply exist inside them. Out in the snow, winter remains immense, indifferent, and severe. In here, for this stretch of night, warmth has the upper hand, and that feels wonderfully civilized. You sit very still after the last sip of coffee, and the silence begins to stretch in new directions. The cabin is warm enough now that your body has stopped complaining, which leaves your ears free to notice the world beyond the walls. At first it seems like nothing at all. Just a heavy winter hush pressing against the glass. Then the night begins to separate into layers, wind in the pines, snow brushing the roof, a faraway crack from the forest, a soft, irregular tapping at the shutter that turns out to be a twig worrying the wood with patient little strokes. The wilderness never truly goes quiet. That is one of winter's clever illusions. Snow muffles, cold stills, distance widens, and the mind fills the gaps by calling the whole world silent. Yet sound is everywhere. If you wait long enough, it just travels differently. It glides low across frozen ground. It slips around trees. It arrives thinned out and peculiar, stripped of all but the most essential edge. A fox moving through powder may sound like a hand brushing velvet. A distant branch breaking can resemble a musket shot. The night edits everything. You rise from the stool and walk to the window. Frost clouds the panes almost completely, but in one corner a clear patch has formed where the fire's heat has kissed the glass. You look through it and find a world reduced to silver and shadow. The clearing gleams under moonlight. Snowbanks throw long blue shapes across the ground. The trees at the edge stand like a wall of black spears, their upper boughs swaying with a grace that looks almost slow enough to hear. Then you do hear it, a low rushing sound, drawn out and hollow, as the wind moves through needles high above. It rises, fades, then returns with a different pitch. Many people compare that sound to distant surf, though the frontier held plenty of people who had never seen an ocean and must have found the comparison deeply unhelpful. To you it sounds more like breath through the neck of a bottle, multiplied by 1,000 invisible mouths. Strange, steady, and faintly mournful. You press 2 fingers to the cold glass. Even through the frost, the window shocks your skin. It reminds you how thin the barrier is between this pocket of firelight and the brutal cold outside. Frontier cabins made that truth impossible to ignore. A wall was protection, yes, but also a confession. Nature was not conquered here. It was negotiated with one seam, one shutter, one stacked log at a time. Historians have long noted how vulnerable winter housing could be on the American frontier, yet there is still disagreement over how people describe that vulnerability to themselves. Some letters present it as hardship, others turn it into pride. Some barely mention it at all, which may be the strongest proof that extreme discomfort can become ordinary. A hard sound snaps from the woods. You instinctively straighten. The fire behind you crackles brightly, unaware of drama. While you look into the dark tree line and wait for movement, none comes. After a moment you decide it was likely a limb breaking under frost. In severe cold, trees can split because the wood contracts unevenly and frozen sap strains the grain. The reports can echo astonishingly far in still weather. It must have startled many a frontier traveller into imagining ambushes, spirits, or worse. Your imagination, being a loyal servant of darkness, offers several possibilities at once. None of them help. You let the curtain fall back into place and turn to the room again. The fire is stable, the candle is low. The iron pot near the hearth gives off a sleepy thread of steam. Everything indoors appears calm, yet your senses have sharpened. That is another gift from remote places. They make you listen with your whole body. The skin across your shoulders notices drafts. Your nose reads changes in smoke. Your feet learn which floorboards speak under pressure. This is not the alertness of a city. It is older and slower. You decide to tend the fire before curiosity tempts you outside, which would be a very romantic and highly foolish idea. The logs have settled into a glowing heap, crossed by 2 bright tongues of flame. You kneel, place another split of wood at the back, and stir the coals with the poker until their hidden orange wakes into colour. Heat rolls against your face in a sudden wave, bringing with it the scent of resin and old soot. The cabin answers with a gentle creak from the rafters as if approving your priorities. Warmth first, mystery later. That was likely the correct order for nearly every frontier problem. You return to the window, but this time you take the candle and shield the flame with your hand so it does not reflect too brightly on the pane. Outside, tiny crystals flash in the air. Fine snow is falling again, though not heavily, and each grain catches moonlight for an instant before vanishing into the white ground. The drifting flakes make the clearing look inhabited by faint, aimless sparks. It is beautiful in a stern sort of way, as though the night has decorated itself only with things that can survive it. Near the woodpile, a shadow moves. It is brief and low to the ground. You hold your breath. A moment later it slips into better light and becomes a rabbit, white-bellied and quick. Pausing with one ear tilted, it noses the snow, then darts toward the side of the cabin and disappears. That tiny sight warms you almost as much as the fire. Life is out there, cautious, hungry, wrapped in fur, but carrying on. Winter on the frontier was harsh for people, but it was also a season animals had evolved to read far better than any newcomer with boots and opinions. You know, some of the likely neighbours in such country. Snowshoe hares, foxes, deer, owls, perhaps wolves farther out, certainly mice wherever human grain or crumbs exist. Cabins attracted small creatures with almost insulting efficiency. Mice could find flour through a crack no wider than a thumbnail, and settlers fought long campaigns against them with traps, cats, and language that probably would not suit a bedtime story. There are accounts of raccoons, skunks, and even bolder visitors testing the edges of frontier homes when food grew scarce. Shelter has a scent. So does cooking. As if summoned by that thought, you hear a faint scratch. It comes from somewhere low in the wall near the shelf, not dramatic, not monstrous, just tiny claws and determined hunger. You smile despite yourself. There it is, the universal houseguest of human history, a mouse, or perhaps 2, conducting its evening inspection. Even in America's coldest winter, some traditions remain unshaken. The scratch stops, then starts again, accompanied by a sound so small it is nearly imaginary, like paper being folded by careful fingers. You do not investigate further. Let it keep its privacy. Instead, you lift the lid on the kettle and watch the steam gather and fade. The smell of hot metal mingles with the sweeter scent of pine sap from the newest log. Air near the hearth is pleasantly dry against your cheeks, though the tip of your nose still catches colder currents that curl along the floor. A frontier room in winter could carry several seasons at once if you stood in the right spots. Here on the stool it is late autumn. Near the door it is January. At the window it is practically the moon. The moon itself has brightened. You can tell from the stronger silver pressed across the frosted pane. There is enough light now to reveal the outlines of the snowbanks more clearly, each drift sculpted into smooth shoulders and ridges. Wind has combed them into long forms that look almost deliberate, like something made by a patient artist with a white chisel. Snow records weather as faithfully as ink records words. Each layer, crust, hollow, and ripple tells of earlier gusts, sun, thaw, and renewed freeze. People who travelled often learn to read that surface for depth, danger, and direction. Yet winter also loves deception. A drift that appears gentle may hide a hole beneath. A crust that holds one step may break under the next. A riverbank can look solid until it suddenly is not. Many old Western accounts mention the exhausting misery of crusted snow that sliced through horse legs or dumped a walker knee-deep without warning. This landscape is lovely by moonlight, yes, but it has all the friendliness of polished marble stairs and socks. Beauty and treachery are often roommates. From somewhere high in the dark comes a single owl call. It is soft, rounded, almost conversational. Then silence. Then another call, farther away, as if the first bird has been answered. You feel the sound in the room more than hear it. Winter air carries certain tones with startling clarity. Owls, in particular, seem built for such nights, moving through cold like pieces of it given feathers. The sound changes the clearing again. Now it is not just snow and moon and trees. It is territory, hunt, listening, hunger, exchange. You imagine the bird out there on a branch, head tilted, eyes gathering whatever small motion the snow reveals. Frontier people noticed owls with a mix of practicality and superstition. Some welcomed them as mouse hunters. Others muttered that their calls meant weather, death, or visitors. Folk beliefs travelled west along with trunks, hymn books, seeds, and kettles. A new land did not erase old fears. It merely gave them fresh scenery. A fire pops sharply behind you. You turn and see a shower of sparks leap up the chimney, brief as golden insects. A strip of bark has peeled back from one log, revealing bright coals beneath. You use the poker to settle it. The movement fills the room with a richer smell, part smoke, part heated pitch, and a soft puff of ash drifts upward before vanishing. Touch, smell, sound, all of it presses gently inward. Winter outdoors sharpens the senses, but winter indoors gathers them into a small circle and makes each detail feel important. You sit again and let your palm hover over the hearthstones. They're warm enough now to radiate steady heat through the skin. Nearby, the wool blanket has taken on a baked smell, not unpleasant, just deeply domestic. Your dry socks are warm when you pull them tighter. Even the air tastes different than it did at dusk. Less like cold iron, more like smoke and coffee and softened wood. The cabin is changing by the hour, and so are you. Fatigue has given way to a slower, more watchful contentment. Then the wind shifts. You hear it at once, not louder exactly, but lower, pressing from another angle. The chimney hum becomes a murmur. One shutter rattles twice. Snow dust skims the glass in a diagonal hiss. That quick rearrangement of sound tells you more than any barometer could. Weather is moving. Perhaps not a storm. Perhaps only stronger currents sliding down from higher ground. But enough to remind you that calm in winter is often temporary. Frontier households learn to read wind by wall, window, and roof, because a change in tone could mean a long night of tending fire and checking drifts. You stand, cross to the door, and place your hand against the wood, cold, solid. A faint vibration from the gusts outside. The bar is secure. The latch does not jump. Satisfied. You remain there for a moment, listening through the planks. Beneath the wind you catch a distant, wavering sound, so faint you almost dismiss it. Then it comes again. A howl, drawn thin by distance. Not near, not urgent, just part of the country speaking in its own voice. So there are wolves after all, or perhaps one wolf, or a coyote. For the two are easily confused at a distance if you're not an expert and not currently interested in humiliating yourself. The sound is eerie, mostly because of what the mind adds to it. In practical terms, a firelit cabin with closed shutters and a human inside is not ideal prey. In emotional terms, however, the sound glides straight down the spine and stands there with folded arms. You feel a little thrill, half awe and half animal memory. The howl does not return immediately. Instead, the woods resume their quieter business. Snow sifts. Branches complain softly. Somewhere the rabbit, if it was wise, has gone still. You become aware of your own breathing in the room, of the way the blanket edge brushes your wrist, of the faint pulse in your fingers as warmth circulates. This is what remote winter does so well. It makes the smallest human facts feel vivid: breath, skin, light, shelter, a cup, a wall, a bar across a door. Nothing seems trivial here. That may be one reason such nights stay in memory so firmly. Hard weather strips away clutter. It reduces life to essentials, then reveals how rich essentials can be. Fire becomes a companion. A good log is a comfort. A tight latch is a blessing. The sound of an owl can fill an entire evening. Modern life loves abundance. A cabin in the frozen dark teaches reverence for enough. You move back to the stool and pull the blanket around your shoulders once more. The fire burns with patient confidence. The kettle breathes steam. The clearing outside has blurred again with drifting snow, its edges softened, its shapes half erased. The wilderness remains there, close as ever, full of little lives and cold intentions, yet the room holds. And tonight, that quiet holding feels almost magical. The night grows deeper, and with it your thoughts drift toward the plain mechanics of staying alive in a season like this. The fire is no longer a novelty. It has become part of a system. The blanket over your shoulders, the boots drying by the hearth, the kettle warming at the edge of the coals, the food put away from mice, the door checked twice, the wood stacked within easy reach. None of it looks dramatic. That is precisely the point. Frontier winter did not reward drama very often. It rewarded routines, habits, and the kind of practical caution that would make a gambler yawn and a sensible grandmother nod with satisfaction. You glance around the cabin again, but now you see it differently, not as shelter alone, and not as a cozy little scene arranged by chance. You see a survival machine built from logs, iron, cloth, and memory. Every object earns its place. The hearth is the heart, of course, but the bed matters too, raised just enough from the floor to escape the coldest drafts. The pegs by the door keep wet things from sinking into the bedding. The shelf keeps food above the reach of casual pests. The small table provides a clean surface for preparation, repair, and eating, which may sound modest until you consider how quickly disorder turns dangerous in a cramped winter room. Life on the frozen frontier was full of such modest victories. A day might be judged successful not because anything grand happened, but because the chimney drew well, the water did not freeze solid, the meat stayed edible, and no one lost feeling in their toes. Many people who moved west in the 19th century brought heroic expectations with them. They imagined broad land, rich opportunity, and perhaps a slightly cleaner version of adventure than reality supplied. Then winter arrived and introduced itself in a far less poetic tone. Suddenly the noble frontier became a place where someone felt triumphant because the bread rose, the axle held, and the milk cow did not wander into a drift and disappear. You know exactly the sort of triumph that is. It is humble and intensely satisfying. You rise from the stool and check the remaining woodpile inside the cabin. Enough for the night, though not so much that you feel wasteful using it. Wood was labour made visible. Each split log represented chopping, hauling, stacking, drying, and protecting from snow. A person could admire a pile of seasoned firewood with the same reverence others reserve for jewellery. On some isolated homesteads, the amount of cut wood outside before the first hard freeze was practically an inventory of a family's hope. Too little, and the season became a slow campaign of anxiety. You picture the daily work such a cabin demanded in full winter. Before dawn, someone might stir from under layers of quilts and wool to coax yesterday's coals back to life. That task required patience, dry kindling, and a willingness to place cold feet onto colder boards. Once flame returned, water had to be heated, breakfast prepared, livestock, if any, checked and fed. Snow cleared from the doorway, tools brought in from the bitter air. Then came repairs, chopping, hauling, mending, cooking. and the 1,000 small responses required by weather that never truly stopped interfering. Cold did not merely sit outside, it entered every schedule, every decision, every movement of the day. A trip to fetch water became longer because the path was drifted over. A wagon wheel repair took more effort because numb fingers fumbled pegs and nails. Laundry became a tactical problem. Meat could freeze too hard to cut. Eggs might crack. Lamp oil thickened. Ink turned sluggish in the pen. On especially bitter days, some settlers wrote that even speaking outdoors felt wasteful, as if words themselves should be conserved and kept warm. That sounds dramatic, yet it also sounds true. Your eyes settle on the wash basin in the corner, where the skin of ice has thickened again. There it is, the frontier in miniature. Water indoors, still freezing. Civilization trying its best. Nature declining to cooperate. You walk over and touch the thin white layer with one fingertip. It snaps softly. A tiny starburst spreads across the surface. The chill lingers on your skin for a moment before the cabin warmth takes it away. This little basin tells an honest story. No matter how well you manage the fire, there would always be corners of life winter kept under its thumb. Sanitation, for one thing, was often a deeply unglamorous challenge. Chamber pots, privies buried in snow, frozen washcloths, and the general inconvenience of trying to stay reasonably clean when water must be heated and every draught feels personal. People coped because people always do, but no sensible person should romanticize the details too enthusiastically. The Wild West had plenty of grandeur, yet it also had frozen soap, smoky hair, and laundry that came indoors stiff enough to stand like startled ghosts if hung outside too long before freezing. You sit again and pull the blanket tighter. The wool traps warmth against your neck, and you think of clothing, perhaps the most intimate frontier technology of all. Before central heating, clothes were not just fashion or modesty. They were architecture you wore. Wool shirts, flannel petticoats, long underwear, mittens, scarves, heavy coats, felt hats, buffalo robes, moccasins lined with fur, boots greased against moisture. Layering was not a style choice. It was common sense dressed in sheep and leather. Some garments earned deep affection. A reliable pair of gloves, a shawl that blocked drafts, a cap that stayed on at night. People repaired these things repeatedly, patch over patch, because breaking in a new item could take time and risk. There are accounts of settlers stuffing newspaper into boots for insulation, wrapping feet in spare cloth, or sleeping with tomorrow's clothes under the blankets so they would not be punishingly cold at dawn. That last trick feels especially wise. Nothing spoils optimism faster than pulling on a frozen shirt in darkness. You smile at the thought and glance toward your own coat folded near the bed. Sensible. Solid. Slightly smoky now. Perfect. Food, too, shaped winter survival more profoundly than heroic stories usually admit. A frontier family might endure poor decor, loneliness, and tedious labour if the pantry held enough flour, beans, salt pork, dried apples, coffee, molasses, or cornmeal. But if supplies ran thin, the season changed character at once. Then every storm became a threat, every delayed wagon a worry, every extra mouth at the table an arithmetic problem no one enjoyed solving. Nutrition was not discussed in modern terms, of course, but people understood from experience that hard work and extreme cold demanded heavy, sustaining food. Calories were comfort with consequences. You can almost taste the sort of meals that filled cabins like this. Bean stews that simmered for hours, cornbread baked in iron, salt pork, bacon, rabbit when luck allowed, venison if hunting went well, dried fruit revived in hot water, coffee boiled strong enough to strip varnish, and biscuits of heroic density. Delicious might be too generous a word for some of it. Yet hunger is a magnificent chef. Add enough cold, enough labour, and enough gratitude, and even a plain bowl of beans can feel oddly majestic. One curious detail from frontier food culture still amuses historians. In isolated places, ingredients could become astonishingly flexible in identity. Coffee substitutes made from roasted grains or roots appeared when supplies failed. Pie could be approximated with crackers and syrup. There were mock dishes of all kinds, recipes built from memory and necessity rather than strict truth. A person might eat something called pudding, pie, or sausage that bore only a philosophical relation to the original. Winter encouraged this creativity because hunger has never cared much for culinary purity. Historians still dispute how uniformly these substitutions were used across different regions of the West. Since records vary by class, climate, and access to trade, mining towns, military posts, ranches, and isolated homesteads all lived by somewhat different rules. Yet the broad pattern is clear enough. People adapted with whatever they had. Some adapted elegantly. Some adapted with grim determination and a frying pan. Both methods counted. Your gaze drifts to the tools near the door. Shovel. Snowshoes. An axe with a worn handle. There is an entire frontier philosophy leaning in that corner. Tools were security. A broken handle in summer was annoying. A broken handle in a hard winter could become a genuine crisis. This is one reason repair skills mattered so much. Sharpening, patching, binding, resewing, mending, improvising. The frontier did not ask whether you enjoyed maintenance. It assumed you would learn or become a cautionary tale. That stern practicality shaped domestic life as much as outdoor labour. Many people imagine the Wild West only through saloons, revolvers, cattle drives, and broad dusty streets full of swaggering men. But a huge part of Western life happened indoors, in small rooms like this one, where people sewed, read, cooked, patched harness, rendered fat, shelled beans, braided rugs, taught children letters, and tried not to let the fire die. Women's work in particular often kept the entire machinery of survival running, though older popular histories had a rude habit of treating these skills as background scenery. They were not background, they were structure. A neat seam could save warmth. A carefully canned jar could save a meal. A well-run household could save everyone. You let those truths settle with the same gentle weight as the blanket. The firelight glows across the floorboards, revealing a pattern of wear near the hearth where countless feet must have stood. You imagine them, heavy boots, lighter shoes, children's quick steps, perhaps one elderly pair moving more slowly but no less purposefully. Cabins gathered lives into small spaces. Their walls heard every cough, argument, prayer, joke, lullaby, and worried whisper about weather or money. That closeness could comfort or irritate. Sometimes within the same hour, privacy was scarce. Tempers, when they flared, had little room to dissipate. Yet community inside a winter cabin also meant shared labour and shared resilience. Someone fetched wood. Someone stirred the pot. Someone darned socks. Someone watched the weather. Someone told a story while hands kept busy. The frozen frontier was survived by individuals. Yes, but very often through cooperation so routine it became almost invisible. Even solitude depended on other people's knowledge. Whoever built this hearth understood draught and stone. Whoever cut and seasoned the wood knew the forest. Whoever stitched the blanket knew wool and patience. Whoever made the iron pot, forged the nails, shaped the hinges, tanned the leather, ground the flour, and hauled the goods west is present here in absent form. A remote cabin can feel lonely, but it is never truly the work of one person. It is a little museum of other hands. You become aware of the smell in the room again. Smoke, warm wool, a trace of cooked pork, pine resin, hot metal, and old timber. It is a dense, comforting fragrance. Not pretty in the fashionable sense, but deeply human. Frontier homes had characteristic smells shaped by fuel, food, animal hides, lamp oil, damp clothing, and stored provisions. Visitors noticed these things. So did diary writers. Smell may be the fastest road to memory. which means many people probably recalled winter homes not first by sight, but by smoke on wool and bread near the hearth. Outside, the wind runs a little harder against the walls, and snow taps the shutter in a dry rattle. You can feel the cold trying the seams again. This is another reason life on the frozen frontier demanded constant attention. Comfort was temporary unless maintained. Heat escaped, food spoiled or froze, roofs leaked, chimneys clogged, paths vanished, livestock wandered. A single weak point could turn into a larger misery overnight. Romantic. Certainly. Also exhausting. Still, there was pride in managing it all. A person who could keep a cabin warm, fed, and functioning through a brutal winter possessed a practical authority no parade could improve. Not glamorous authority, perhaps, but the real kind. The kind that keeps children alive, hands workable, and hope in decent condition until spring. The mythology of the West often crowns the loudest characters. Winter would have chosen different heroes entirely. You stand and check the kettle once more, then pour some warm water into the cup and rinse it carefully. Even this small act feels part of the larger order. Clean enough, dry enough, ready for morning. You set it upside down on the table. The candle beside it has burned lower, its wax puddled and pearly around the base. Shadows climb the walls in gentle motion, while the fire gives the room its steady orange pulse. The cabin seems smaller now, though not in a bad way. It feels contained, sufficient, purposeful. A box of warmth held together by labour and habit. You can see why such places inspired affection. They were demanding, yes, they asked much. But in return they taught competence, thrift, attention, and gratitude for things modern comfort sometimes renders invisible. A full wood box, a dry blanket, a hot drink, a working latch. These are not tiny luxuries here. They are the shape of security. You lower yourself back onto the stool and stretch your hands toward the blaze. Heat brushes your palms. The logs settle with a soft sigh. Beyond the frosted window lies a vast and indifferent winter. But inside this rough room, every useful object seems to gather close, as if holding its own quiet line against the cold. You sit among them, warmed by their plain reliability, and feel the strange calm that comes when survival has been broken down into simple tasks and met, one by one, with care. It is not grand. It is better than grand. It is enough. And on the frozen frontier, enough is a beautiful thing. The hour has reached that peculiar depth when a cabin begins to feel like a lantern set down in the middle of an endless dark. The fire still burns well, though with a slower, redder glow, and the candle on the table has shortened into a squat little pillar of patience. Outside, the clearing has disappeared behind drifting snow and moonlit haze. The window shows almost nothing now except a shifting blur of frost and pale light, as if the night has pressed its face to the glass and chosen not to introduce itself. You become aware of the cabin's older sounds, not the fire. You know the fire already. These are the quieter noises that live underneath it. A beam answering the cold with a tiny click, a nail giving a faint metallic tick as the wood around it tightens, the loft settling with a soft complaint. The bed rope making a small stretched hum when the boards shift under the room's changing warmth. It is a full orchestra of humble materials, each part performing with minimal vanity. Old cabins are wonderfully dramatic in private. They never stop adjusting. You tilt your head and listen more carefully. The roof lets out a low creaking murmur, followed by the muffled slide of snow slipping from one section above. It sounds like a heavy blanket being tugged slowly across a floor. Then all is still again, except for the wind brushing the eaves. People who spent long winters in remote homes became connoisseurs of structural gossip. They knew which sounds meant nothing, which meant settling, and which deserved a lantern and immediate investigation. This cabin seems sturdy, but not silent. That is reassuring. Perfect silence in an old place can be almost suspicious. like a person in a crowded room who has suddenly stopped talking because they are planning something unhelpful. A creak here, a tick there, a sleepy groan in the rafters. All of it suggests life in the timber. The walls are doing their work, flexing against the cold, carrying the roof, and holding back the weather with stubborn good manners. Then a sharper noise comes from outside. A brief scrape along the outer wall. Light, deliberate. You sit up straight and let the blanket slip from one shoulder. It comes again, near the corner by the wood pile, followed by a pause. Not wind this time. Something moving close to the cabin. You remain still. The room seems to do the same. Even the fire, quite unfairly, becomes quieter when mystery arrives. A third sound follows. Sniffing. Now that is rude. You rise without hurrying and reach for the poker, not because it would make a particularly noble weapon, but because holding a length of iron does wonders for confidence. Crossing to the window, you shield the candle with your hand and peer through the clearest patch in the frost. At first, you see only white breath on the glass from your own face, which is not useful. You wipe the pane gently with your sleeve and wait for the world beyond to sharpen. There, near the side of the cabin, a dark shape moves. Broad back. Low head. Heavy shoulders dusted with snow. For one dramatic second, your imagination supplies a whole bear, which would certainly improve the evening's excitement while reducing its longevity. Then the creature lifts its head into the moonlight and reveals antlers, a deer, a buck, though not a large one, pawing at the snow near the wall where some bit of stored hay or stray vegetable scent may have drifted. You let out a breath that had become unexpectedly expensive. The deer flicks an ear, then another. It stands with that gentle, nervous stillness deer possess so perfectly, as if every part of the animal is listening at once. Moonlight traces the curve of its back. Steam rises from its nostrils. One hoof scrapes the snow, searching for whatever faint promise brought it close. Frontier cabins often attracted such visitors in severe winters. Any trace of salt, fodder, or shelter from wind could draw animals nearer than usual, turning the edges of a homestead into a little zone of dangerous temptation. You watch it for several long seconds. It feels almost indecent to be warm while that creature stands outside in the iron cold with only fur, alertness, and instinct to protect it. Yet deer were made for landscapes like this in ways humans are not. Their winter coats trap air beautifully. Their movements conserve energy. Their ears turn like instruments. Even so, deep snow could be brutal on them, especially in prolonged hard seasons. Harsh winters shaped animal populations as surely as human fortunes. The buck lowers its head again, then suddenly freezes. Its whole body changes, and not panic, readiness. You lean closer to the glass and feel your own muscles answer that silent alarm. The deer stares toward the tree line on the far side of the clearing. You cannot see what it sees. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. Then, with astonishing grace for a creature built of legs and caution, it wheels and bounds away in 3 long leaps, vanishing into dark timber so completely it seems swallowed whole. Now the clearing looks empty again. It is not empty. It only appears that way. You wait. At first, nothing moves. Snow drifts past in slow silver threads. The pines sway. Then, along the edge of the woods, a shape slips between shadows. Slender, quick, low. Not a wolf this time. A fox. Likely red, though the moon has reduced it to ink and frost. It crosses the far side of the clearing with effortless purpose, nose down, tail level, a little streak of intelligence wrapped in fur. So that was enough to trouble the deer. Not mortal danger, perhaps, but enough to spoil its peace. The fox pauses once and lifts its muzzle. For a moment it seems to look directly at the cabin. There is something profoundly unsettling about being observed by a small wild animal while standing in your socks behind glass. It should not feel significant, and yet it does. The fox remains still for only a heartbeat before continuing on, slipping round a drift and out of sight. You stay at the window a while longer. but no further actor enters the stage. Eventually the clearing returns to moonlight, blowing powder and rumour. You lower the poker and smile at yourself. Frontier nights were generous with opportunities for melodrama. A scrape at the wall becomes a beast, a shadow becomes two possibilities and a family legend. There were good reasons for such alertness, of course. Wild animals could threaten livestock, stores, and sleep. But the imagination has always enjoyed winter, because winter supplies the best lighting for overreaction. Still, some fears had practical roots. Wolves drew the most folklore and often the least fairness. They haunted frontier stories as symbols of hunger, wilderness, and all the things humans dislike seeing reflected back at them. In truth, wolves generally preferred easier meals than a defended cabin. They were dangerous under certain conditions, yes, especially to stock and in extreme scarcity. But the popular image often outpaced reality. Coyotes, foxes, and mountain lions each carried their own reputations. Some deserved, some embroidered. Historians still argue over how much frontier storytelling amplified these dangers for entertainment, memory, or local pride. It is easy to understand why the stories grew. Night helps them. A remote cabin takes every distant sound and gives it importance. Every brush against the wall becomes a question. Every moving shadow earns a theory. Add a little isolation, a little fatigue, and enough wind to shake the shutters, and the mind begins furnishing the dark with all sorts of unpaid guests. The remarkable thing is not that people told eerie stories. The remarkable thing is that they remained as calm as they often did. You return the poker to its place and settle back near the fire, but the room has changed subtly. Not in fact, in feeling. You are more aware now of its edges, of the stout logic of its walls, of the way light gathers close and then fails a few feet beyond. The corners seem deeper. The loft above looks less like storage and more like somewhere a secret might sit quietly and collect dust. None of this is threatening, exactly. It is simply the natural mood of an old cabin after midnight. You glance up toward the rafters. Something there catches the firelight for an instant. Only a glass bottle on a high beam, forgotten or stored, its surface flashing amber before vanishing back into shadow. The moment still startles you. That is how keyed your senses have become. The bottle itself raises a curious thought. Frontier households stored all manner of things overhead or high on shelves, partly for space, partly for safety, and partly because some items did better away from damp floors and mice. Seeds, medicine, keepsakes, candles, dried herbs, and sometimes objects no one used but no one wished to throw away either. Cabins accumulated odd little biographies, a broken buckle kept in a box, a spoon bent and straightened again, a Bible with a singed corner, a child's marble, a boot last, a button tin, a scrap of lace carried west for no practical reason except that someone loved it. That is the thing about remote living. It makes objects more intimate. When there are fewer possessions, each one develops a personality by sheer necessity. A cup is never just a cup if it has served through 10 winters, survived 3 journeys, and dented only slightly when dropped from a wagon. A blanket becomes a witness. A lantern becomes an accomplice. A cabin itself becomes less a structure than a stubborn household member with opinions about wind. The wind proves the point by changing again. This time it comes in stronger bursts, enough to send a firmer shudder through the shutter hinges. Snow rasps briefly across the roof. Somewhere beyond the wall, a loose twig or thin branch taps in an irregular pattern, faint but persistent, not loud enough to worry you, quite loud enough to be annoying. Frontier people knew these tiny torments well. A squeaking hinge, a whistle and chinking, a drip that began only during thaws, a draught that found precisely the part of the bed no blanket could tame. Domestic irritation did not vanish just because the setting was heroic. The more you think about it, the funnier that is. Out here on the vast American frontier, under one of the fiercest winters in memory, The enemy might still be a mouse in the flower or a branch tapping the wall like a bored neighbour. Human life is magnificently undignified in that way. Even in epic conditions, annoyance remains wonderfully small-scale. Perhaps that is why ordinary complaints are so soothing. They keep the world manageable. Another sound rises, soft and near, not outside this time, from above. A brief rustle from the loft, then stillness. You look up sharply, then almost laugh. Of course, heat from the fire is lifting into the upper space, warming wood, blankets, and whatever small resident creature may have decided, the loft makes excellent winter housing. Squirrels, mice, and other opportunists often found their way into roofs and lofts, especially where food scents lingered. Cabin owners did not usually welcome them as paying tenants, but the creatures showed impressive confidence in property law. The rustle comes once more, then a faint thump, small enough to be harmless. Probably. You choose generosity and allow the unseen tenant to remain unintroduced. There are limits to how much truth a person needs before sleep. If it is a mouse, you lose nothing by not meeting it. If it is something larger, then this peaceful ignorance is a brief luxury, and you may as well enjoy it. You pull the blanket higher and hold your hands toward the hearth until the backs of your fingers glow warmly in the firelight. The air now carries a denser scent than earlier. The sweetness of fresh pine has mellowed into richer smoke and glowing bark. Warm wool contributes its faint animal note. Melted snow in the kettle gives off the clean mineral smell of hot water. Together they create that unmistakable winter cabin fragrance, practical and comforting, slightly rough around the edges. It smells like work completed for the day. It smells like shelter. It smells like human beings refusing to be impressed by weather. The thought pleases you. So does the fire. Its flames are smaller, but the bed of coals beneath has become magnificent, layered in orange, crimson, and deep heart red. When you shift one log gently with the poker, hidden heat blooms at once, bright as a secret told under blankets. There is something companionable about a mature fire. Early flames are flashy. Later coals are dependable. Frontier households depended on coals as much as flame, banking them under ash overnight so the morning might begin with a little mercy. Mercy matters in winter. So does humour, oddly enough. Many frontier letters and recollections contain dry jokes about weather, inconvenience, and household mishaps. When life grows difficult, people either laugh or become intolerable, and most communities eventually vote for laughter. A roof leak may still be a roof leak, but it is easier to endure if someone can describe it as the house taking an interest in indoor gardening. You rest your head back against the wall behind the stool and listen once more to the combined music of the room. Wind outside, fire inside, the faint occasional life overhead, the tiny settling noises of old timber. Somewhere beyond the shuttered window, wild creatures move through snow by moonlight, conducting their serious business with elegant silence. In here, the cabin holds itself together with the patient creaks of age and use. It no longer feels lonely. It feels inhabited in every direction, by memory, by weather, by watchful animals, by invisible hands that built and mended, by the small hidden lives in walls and roof, by you in your warm socks and borrowed peace. The night is full, not empty. The wilderness is near, not absent. And the old cabin, with all its murmurs and secret rustles, seems less like a box against the dark and more like a living threshold between human warmth and the untamed cold beyond. You let the room settle around you until the cabin feels less like a shelter and more like a ritual. The deepest part of night invites these little rituals, not grand ceremonies, just the steady habits that make darkness gentler to live inside. You rise from the stool and straighten the table, though it hardly needs straightening. You fold the cloth around the remaining bread. You nudge the cup into a neater place beside the candle. You shake out the blanket once, then drape it over your shoulders again with more care than before, as though arranging yourself properly for the hours ahead. That small orderliness changes the mood at once. A frontier evening was often held together by such details. in cabins scattered across cold valleys, mining camps, timber clearings, and lonely grassland edges. People created comfort with repetition. A lamp trimmed the same way every night, a pot hung on the same hook, a quilt folded and refolded into the same square. The mind rests more easily when the hands know what to do. That may be one reason domestic rituals grow strongest in hard places. When the world outside is wild and changeable, indoor habits become a kind of soft architecture. The candlelight glows across the table, warming the wood into a rich honey colour. The flame moves only slightly, and its steadiness makes the room seem calmer than it is. Firelight dances, candlelight lingers. Together they make a cabin feel inhabited, even when no voice is raised. You sit down and place your palms flat on the tabletop. The surface is smooth in some places and rough in others, polished by years of sleeves, dishes, elbows, and useful work. You imagine the kinds of evenings that once gathered here. Not adventures exactly. Something better. A woman patching a cuff while stew thickened by the hearth. A man scraping mud from a boot heel with a knife and pretending not to be tired. A child tracing circles in spilled flour. Someone humming under their breath. Someone telling a story only half for entertainment, and half because the wind sounded too large that night. Cabins on the frontier were theatres for very ordinary scenes, and those scenes carried more weight than gunfights ever did. You rise and cross to the wooden box in the corner. The cracked lid opens with a faint dry sigh. Inside are odds and ends, exactly the sort of mixed treasures a practical life produces. A twist of cord, 2 needles stuck through a scrap of cloth, a folded packet of tea, 3 buttons that do not match, a chipped comb, a whetstone, a bundle of candles wrapped in paper gone translucent with grease, and beneath them all, almost hidden, a small deck of cards softened by use. That feels right for a winter cabin. Cards, checkers, dominoes, fiddles, hymn singing, recited poems, almanacs, family stories, tall tales, and the occasional gossip repeated until it became local history. Entertainment in remote places did not always require novelty. It required enough charm to outlast darkness. People today often imagine historical lives as either crushingly dull or thrillingly dramatic, when in truth most evenings were balanced somewhere between the two. A little boredom, a little comfort, a little laughter, and the steady relief of being indoors while weather scraped at the roof. You set the cards on the table and shuffle them slowly. The paper is soft at the edges, almost velvety with age. A corner bends back on one card and reveals the layers in the pasteboard. You deal out a simple game for one, not because winning matters, but because the motion is soothing. The dry whisper of cards against wood blends with the crackle from the hearth. A queen lands beside a black jack. A red 5 waits where you do not need it. Entire empires have risen and fallen, yet a badly timed card still manages to annoy. Some things are eternal. You play absent-mindedly, watching shadows move across the suit symbols as the fire shifts. Card games travelled everywhere on the frontier because they were light, cheap, and good company. In some places they meant gambling, boasting, and poor decisions in smoky rooms. In others they simply filled an hour after supper. Historians still disagree over how moral communities felt about such amusements in remote settlements, since one diary might condemn card playing as idle vice while another mentions it as casually as mending a sock. Human beings have never been consistent about pleasure. You lose the little game with quiet dignity and gather the cards again. It occurs to you that many nights in cabins like this were saved by small entertainments that asked almost nothing from the body. After a day of chopping, hauling, feeding animals, or travelling through snow, the appetite for excitement might be surprisingly low. What people wanted was gentle occupation, something to keep the mind from dwelling too hard on wind, distance, and tomorrow's labour. A story, a hand of cards, a tune on a fiddle, the rereading of a cherished letter until the folds grew white at the seams. That last thought leads you to the shelf. Tucked beside the lantern is a book, small, thick, plain brown cover. You take it down and discover an almanac, its pages thumbed and smudged. How very frontier. An almanac was half tool, half companion. It gave calendars, weather sayings, planting advice, astronomical notes, practical remedies, jokes, and miscellaneous facts with a confidence that modern readers might find either charming or deeply bold. In remote households, such books were used hard. They bridged the distance between local life and the wider world, one page at a time. You flip it open and inhale the dry, papery smell. It is lovely, dusty, faintly sour, with a trace of smoke in the binding. Books absorb houses. This one has lived near a hearth long enough to prove it. The pages offer moon phases, recipes, advice on preserving meat, and a scattering of little sayings that sound wise even when they are clearly guessing. One note about weather predicts a hard freeze after a red sunset, which feels rather smug given your current situation. Another suggests an herbal infusion for coughs that may help, though just as easily it may have tasted terrible and inspired health through fear alone. Frontier households often mixed printed guidance with folk custom in ways that would make a modern pharmacist sit down very slowly. Dried herbs were hung from beams. Onion syrups were made for chest complaints. Goose grease, mustard plasters, burnt sugar, horehound, and vinegar all had their defenders. Some remedies had real effect. Others mostly occupied the patient until the body solved the problem itself. That uncertain border between medicine and faith was common in isolated places where doctors were distant and winter roads worse than rumours. You close the almanac and return it to the shelf. The book leaves behind a mood more than information. It makes the cabin feel connected to habits beyond itself. Somewhere else. In another valley or on another plane. Another lamp might be burning beside another copy, while someone in wool sleeves read by the same sort of light and tried to outguess the weather. There is comfort in that invisible fellowship. Distance shrinks a little when routines rhyme. Your attention drifts to the fiddle resting on the wooden box. It has been quietly dignified enough all evening, asking for nothing. Now, in the softer hour, it seems to belong to the atmosphere itself. You pick it up carefully. The wood is cool and slightly rough where the varnish has worn thin. One string is missing, yes, but the others hold. The bow is tired and the hair uneven, though still present enough for a few notes. You hesitate, which is wise. A person alone in a winter cabin should think twice before making eerie music for no reason. Then you try anyway. The first note is dreadful. The second is merely offended. By the third, the instrument and your hands arrive at a mutual compromise. The sound is thin but not unpleasant, wavering in the warm air above the fire. You attempt a simple tune, one of those old melodies that seems to have travelled everywhere because it's too stubborn to stay put. The fiddle complains, then yields, and the room changes at once. Music fills corners, speech leaves untouched. It pulls shape from shadow. Even a rough tune gives the cabin a pulse beyond firelight. You play softly for a minute or two, no more. Enough to let the notes brush the rafters and settle into the wool and smoke. Enough to imagine how welcome such sounds must have been in a place where nights stretched long and weather often kept visitors away. Fiddles were treasured for a reason. They could make a dance floor out of packed earth, a celebration out of beans and bread, a memory out of otherwise ordinary hours. Even here, now, in this tiny room, the instrument adds companionship without saying a word. You lay it back in its place with respect. The silence that follows is gentler than the silence before. That is the best sort. You move to the bed and shake out the blanket you warmed earlier, then fold your coat at the foot for extra weight if the cold deepens. The mattress rustles in a dry, husky way when you press a hand into it. Lumpy, yes, but honest. You smooth the coverlet and notice how the candlelight warms the fabric to a muted gold. Nearby, the fire sends soft waves of heat that do not reach the bed fully, but promise some kindness. This is how many winter comforts worked on the frontier. Not perfectly, just enough. At the table again, you find a small tin and open it to discover scraps of thread wound around bits of card, along with a thimble dented near the rim, another domestic witness. Sewing was constant winter work, not merely to pass the time but to keep everything in service. Shirt cuffs frayed, socks wore through, blankets split at the fold, mittens lost shape, buttonholes gave up. A household that mended regularly could stretch its supplies astonishingly far. A household that ignored such tasks invited little failures to grow teeth. You picture a long evening of mending by this fire, needle flashing in lamplight, thread drawn through wool with a soft pull, fingers pricked now and then. Small annoyance, steady progress. There is something deeply satisfying about repair. It gives structure to time and leaves visible proof that attention matters. Perhaps that is why so many traditional winter activity feels soothing. They transform waiting into usefulness. While the storm goes on being a storm, you patch a cuff, stir the pot, trim a wick, split another stick, and feel life remain in your hands. The cabin smells softer now than it did earlier. Smoke is still the strongest note, but beneath it you catch warm cloth, cooling tea leaves from the open packet, and the faint waxy sweetness of candles. The air has grown denser too, padded by heat. When you brush the blanket with your fingertips, the wool feels almost velour smooth on the worn side and scratchier on the fold. These textures matter at night. In a harsh landscape, touch becomes part of reassurance. Rough wood, warm cup, thick sock, dry blanket. Human skin loves confirmations. You decide the tea should be used. Why not? Proper frontier luxury. You warm water from the kettle, sprinkle the leaves into the cup, and wait while the liquid darkens. Tea was not always easy to come by in Western settlements, but when it appeared it often carried the dignity of civilization in a very portable form. Even poor tea, brewed too long in a dented cup, could make a room feel more refined than it had any right to. You sip carefully. It is strong, slightly bitter, and perfect. The steam curls over your face, smelling leafy and warm, softening the sharper edge of wood smoke, wrapped in blanket and holding the hot cup so you feel momentarily luxurious. Not rich, not pampered, just deeply, sensibly pleased. That distinction matters. The frontier version of comfort was rarely excess. It was appreciation sharpened by contrast. Warmth meant more because cold had been so thorough. Tea tasted better because water had been melted and heated by effort. A mended blanket felt precious because a torn one would be felt at once. Hardship did not automatically ennoble people, despite what certain speeches suggest, but it did make practical pleasures glow brighter. A curious little superstition comes to mind as you sip. In some rural communities, it was said that if a candle flame burned blue or bent sharply without a draught, a visitor was near. Elsewhere, tea leaves floating in certain patterns were taken as signs of letters, journeys, or company on the road. Humans seem unable to resist turning domestic objects into fortune tellers. Perhaps this is especially true in winter, when weather traps people indoors long enough for imagination to begin assigning secret intentions to wax and steam. You glance at the candle as if expecting it to comment. It behaves impeccably. No prophecy tonight, only light. You carry the tea to the hearth and sit on the floor rather than the stool, leaning one shoulder against the bed frame. This lowers you into the warmest part of the room, where the fire can brush your shins and the blanket pools around your legs. The boards beneath feel firm and faintly warm through your socks. You hold the cup near your chest and watch the coals deepen into brilliant pockets of orange under darkening wood. Every so often a tiny hiss escapes where sap meets heat. The whole cabin now seems arranged for rest. Not sleep yet, but the quieter country just before it. Tasks have been done. The cup is full. The bed is prepared. The kettle is warm. The fire is sound. The wind outside has become a lower, more distant murmur, as though even the storm has grown tired of hearing itself. In that softer atmosphere, it becomes easy to understand why people told stories indoors, and not always for children. Stories organize darkness. They keep fear from spreading into the rafters. They make a hard place feel peopled, named, and known. You do not need a full tale tonight. The cabin itself has supplied enough company. Cards, almanac, fiddle, tea, candle, blanket, and the steady domestic charm of old, useful things. These are the humble luxuries that carried many people through bitter seasons when roads vanished and daylight retreated early. Not grand entertainments, better ones. The kind that leave the mind calm and the room warmer in spirit than it was before. You finish the tea and set the cup aside. The last steam fades into the air. Firelight folds over the walls in slow amber waves, and the candle burns with patient confidence on the table. Around you, the little objects of the cabin wait quietly at their stations, each one ready to serve again when needed. You sit among them, wrapped in wool and softened by simple comforts, and let the long winter night feel, for a while, not merely survivable, but deeply, beautifully habitable. Somewhere in the slow middle of the night, the warmth shifts. You feel it before you fully notice it, like a polite warning from the room itself. The fire has not gone out, but it has drawn inward, losing its cheerful flames and settling into a deeper, red concentration. The air against your face is cooler. A thin current brushes the floorboards with more confidence than before. This is the hour winter likes best, when bodies grow drowsy, routines relax, and the cold makes another quiet attempt at the edges of things. You set the empty cup aside and move toward the hearth at once. No hesitation. No romance about drifting off beside fading coals. Frontier life discouraged that sort of sentimentality. In truly bitter weather, the coldest hours before dawn were often the most demanding. Fire must be fed, blankets adjusted, water checked, boots kept from freezing hard. Every practical defence against the dark had to hold a little longer. You kneel before the hearth and stir the coals gently with the poker. At once, hidden heat flares bright beneath the ash, and a breath of warmth rolls up against your hands. The sight is oddly reassuring. The fire is tired, not defeated. You lay in 2 fresh logs, one thicker, one leaner, and angle them to catch the liveliest glow. Then you tuck in dry kindling beneath, listening to the quiet rasp of wood on stone. For a few moments, nothing much happens. Then a pale thread of flame appears, licks upward, and begins its patient work. Frontiersmen and farm women alike knew the stage well. A fire brought back in the deep night carries less swagger than an evening blaze. It is a serious fire, businesslike. It burns not for pleasure first, but for necessity. Still, necessity has its own comfort. As the flames grow, the room responds. Shadows lift. The kettle gives a faint tick of expanding metal. The nearest floorboards warm enough to soften the chill under your socks. Smoke and pine resin thicken in the air again, along with the deep mineral scent of heated stone. You hold your hands out, palms first, then backs of the fingers, feeling that familiar sting of life returning where the coolness had begun to creep in. Human beings have loved dawn fires and midnight fires with special devotion for very obvious reasons. You glance toward the bed. It looks inviting now in the way only a rough bed can after a long day and longer night. Yet you're glad you did not lie down without checking the hearth. In severe winter, a cabin could lose its comfort surprisingly quickly once the fire slackened. Some diaries and recollections describe waking to frozen water beside the bed, frost feathering on interior walls, or breath hanging thick in the room. Historians still debate how often such details were heightened in memory, but no one doubts the core truth. Cold could reclaim a room fast. That is what makes this hour so important. It tests the whole arrangement. Fire, bedding, timber, clothing, patience. Everything is asked whether it can keep going. You rise and walk to the wash basin again. A thicker plate of ice has formed this time, opaque around the edges and clear in the centre. You lift it carefully with 2 fingers and it breaks with a crisp sound like thin china. That little fracture seems almost too loud in the sleeping cabin. You drop the pieces into the kettle to melt later and rub your fingers together. The cold on them is dry and immediate, a stern little reminder from the room that winter remains very much on duty. The shutters rattle once in a stronger gust. Then again, the wind has found a bolder mood. You cross to the window and peer through the frosted pane. Outside, the moon has gone behind a veil of cloud, leaving the clearing dimmer and flatter. Snow drifts low across the ground in pale sheets, skimming from one bank to another like smoke. The tree line is still visible, but only just, a dark wavering fence against the sky. You cannot see falling snow clearly, though you sense it in the changed light and in the dry hiss along the outer wall. This is the part of winter many people underestimated. Not the dramatic storm at supper time, not the pretty snowfall at dusk, the long persistence of cold after midnight, when the body wants stillness and the weather keeps asking for labour. Cabins made that negotiation visible. A city apartment can hide effort behind pipes and switches. A frontier cabin announces every exchange. You want warmth? Then feed the fire. You want water? Then thaw it. You want morning boots? Then dry them properly now, not later. It is fair in a severe way. You check your boots by the hearth. The leather is warm and nearly dry, but not brittle. Good. You turn them slightly so the inner seams catch a little more heat without being scorched. Boots mattered with almost unreasonable intensity in winter country. A coat can be mended, fingers can be warmed, but wet, cracked, or frozen boots could ruin a day before it began. Many old Western accounts linger on footwear for exactly this reason, though popular storytelling usually edits such details out in favour of more glamorous suffering. The truth is less cinematic and more persuasive. Warm feet improve character. You pour a little heated water from the kettle into the tin cup and drink it plain. The warmth is modest, but welcome, and the cup heats your hands while you stand listening. The room feels different at this hour, stripped of evening charm and reduced to essentials again. The candle has burned low enough that you decide not to waste it further. You pinch out the flame, and instantly the cabin belongs almost entirely to the hearth. Firelight alone now, red, gold, and moving. The corners recede, the ceiling darkens, the world simplifies. It becomes a room from centuries earlier, a room of flame and shadow, a room where every object is either useful or absent. You rather like it. The wind eases for a moment, and in that lull you hear a tiny shower of dry snow slipping from the roof edge. Then, from somewhere in the wall, the faint scratch of the same small resident you heard earlier, a mouse, industrious as ever, continuing its own cold weather routines without asking whether the hour is inconvenient. There is comfort in such persistence. Every creature is busy surviving in its own style, the mouse with crumbs, the fox with silence, the owl with patience, you with blankets and firewood. A more unsettling sound follows from outside. Not loud, just near. A crunch in the snow by the porch. You stand very still, cup in hand, and listen. Another crunch, then nothing. The kind of sound that might be one careful hoof, one curious paw, or one bit of snow settling from the porch edge into a drift below. This is the difficulty with night sounds in winter. They arrive stripped of context and wrapped in imagination. You wait a full minute, nothing further comes. Perhaps an animal passing close to the cabin, perhaps the structure itself shedding a little burden. The night, unhelpfully, declines to explain. You do not open the door to investigate. Congratulations to you on this rare victory of judgment over curiosity. Instead, you move to the woodpile and count what remains indoors. Enough for the rest of the night if used sensibly. Not enough to become careless. That calculation would have been second nature to many frontier households. Wood was counted constantly, whether aloud or in the back of the mind. Enough for tonight, enough for morning, enough until the next cutting, enough until weather breaks. The simplest materials often carried the greatest emotional weight because their absence was so easy to imagine. You stack 2 more pieces within arm's reach of the hearth and tuck the blanket tighter around yourself. The wool has cooled on the outer fold but remains warm inside, a private climate preserved by habit. You draw it close under your chin and sit on the stool once more. The wooden seat is hard, the way useful furniture always is, but your body has adapted to that too. The cabin asks small toughnesses and rewards them with steadiness. Frontier sleep itself was shaped by such interruptions. Modern people often imagine a single clean block of nighttime rest, but in many pre-industrial settings, sleep could be segmented. People woke to tend fires, check animals, nurse children, say prayers, or simply sit for a while between deeper rests. Scholars continue to discuss how widespread this pattern truly was across regions and classes, yet it is easy to see why winter cabins encouraged it. The room itself demanded participation. Night was not a curtain that dropped. It was a long shift with quieter duties. That thought makes the hour feel less lonely. You are not awake against nature. You are awake with it, participating in its rhythm. The fire, newly strengthened, begins to show small blue threads at the base of the logs. Their colour is startling and beautiful, a sign of hotter burning gas for brief moments before orange takes over again. The coals beneath look almost architectural now, stacked arches and caves of red light under black bark. You prod them lightly and see whole chambers of hidden heat glow into view. It resembles a buried city, which is a grand thing to say about burning wood, but also accurate enough in this light. The smell of the room deepens further, more char now, less tea. A trace of damp wool near the hem of the blanket where melted snow had once touched it. The air is so dry near the hearth that your lips feel it. You lick them absently and taste smoke, salt from supper lingering still, and the iron note of the cup. These sensory details stand out because the world has narrowed. This is what severe weather does. It edits life until the remaining details arrive with unusual clarity. You think of the people who passed winters in places like this and marvel less at their toughness than at their constancy. Toughness suggests drama. Constancy suggests getting up when you do not want to, repeating useful tasks, and not treating discomfort as a personal insult. That may be the truer virtue. The frontier needed boldness sometimes. Yes, but it needed steadiness far more often. The fire at this hour is not saved by heroics. It is saved by someone standing up, adding wood, and paying attention. There is a lesson in that. A very quiet one, perhaps the best kind. The cold current along the floor retreats a little as the fire regains authority. You feel the room ease with you. The bed no longer seems marooned in chill. The kettle hums faintly where tiny bubbles begin to gather at the base. Even the walls appear less severe in the shifting glow, their knots and seams reappearing from shadow. The cabin, which a short while ago had felt on the verge of being retaken by winter, settles back into its role as shelter. Outside, the darkness remains complete. The clouds have swallowed most of the moon, and the snow reflected through the frost is now only a pale general light, almost no shape at all. You understand how easily distance can vanish on nights like this. A nearby tree, a fence line, a wagon track, all erased into one flat dimness. Travellers caught out in such conditions sometimes walked in circles without knowing it, or lost familiar landmarks under a single renewed drift. Winter has a genius for reducing geography to doubt. Indoors, though, geography is simple. Hearth, bed, table, door, woodpile, cup, blanket. The entire map of safety fits in one room. You take comfort from that compactness. The world outside may be vast and featureless for these few hours, but your world is measured in steps and arm lengths. Reach for the poker, reach for the kettle, reach for the blanket, reach for the door bar if needed. Frontier cabins reduced survival to a human scale, provided one respected their limitations. They could not conquer the winter, but they could frame a space in which a person might outlast the night with competence and a little grace. The stronger wind does not return. Instead, The weather settles into a low sustained murmur around the walls, less like an attack now than a steady pressure. The cabin answers with occasional creaks, each one familiar enough that you barely react. Even the mouse in the wall has gone quiet. The whole place seems poised between effort and rest, as if holding its breath for the first hint of morning still many hours away. You lean forward and stretch your hands toward the blaze one last time before bed. Warmth lays itself across your knuckles, your wrists, the chill tip of your nose. The fire has done its work. So have you. Not triumphantly, simply well enough. In the deepest cold of the night, well enough is its own form of victory. You sit in that red gold light, wrapped in wool, listening to the slow, patient burning of the logs, and feel the rough little fortress of the cabin hold firm against the darkest, coldest hours before dawn. At last the darkness begins to thin, not with colour at first, but with a change in texture. The window remains frosted, the room remains dim, and the fire still governs the cabin with its patient glow. Yet something beyond the glass has softened. Night no longer feels bottomless. It feels tired. The air in the room has that peculiar stillness that comes just before morning reveals itself. When even the wind seems to pause and listen for the first grey hint of day, you notice it while standing near the hearth. One hand around the warm tin cup. The fire has held through the coldest stretch. The bed remains untouched except for the blanket you laid ready. Somehow the night kept you company too well for sleep to arrive fully. Instead, you drifted in and out of a half-restful watchfulness, dozing in the chair, waking to feed the coals, listening to the cabin settle, and waiting for the world outside to return to sight. Now, at last, it does. You move to the window and rub a clear circle in the frost with the side of your thumb. The glass is so cold it makes your skin ache instantly, but the effort is worth it. Beyond the pain, the clearing has emerged again. Not bright, not yet, but visible in shades of pearl and blue-grey. Snow lies smooth over the ground, unbroken in some places and scribbled with signs in others. The scene looks newly written, as if the night has spent all its hours leaving careful marks for whoever was patient enough to read them. Winter loves a clean page. You lean closer, and the first thing you notice is the trail of the deer from the night before. It comes in from the edge of the clearing in a line of deep paired prints, hesitates near the side wall, turns sharply, then bounds away in long impressions that stretch farther apart, each landing punched hard into the powder. The animal must have sprung off in sudden alarm. You can almost see the movement in the snow itself, one moment cautious, the next all nerves and flight. It is a whole little drama preserved without a single spoken word. A second set of tracks crosses farther out. These are smaller, neater, almost elegant. Fox, you suspect. The prints run in a tidy line with that peculiar efficient directness foxes manage so well, as if the creature had places to be and no intention of wasting effort. It paused once by a drift where the snow has been disturbed and scattered. Perhaps listening, perhaps pouncing, perhaps disappointed by breakfast and moving on with quiet dignity. Morning snow turns the invisible night into evidence. It lets you see how busy the wilderness has been while you sat by the fire thinking yourself the centre of events. You are very much not the centre. That seems healthy. You widen the clear patch on the glass and keep reading. Near the porch are little scribbles and comma-shaped marks, likely from birds hopping and pecking around the eaves, where stray crumbs or bits of ice may have collected. Along one bank runs a tunnel-like groove where wind-blown powder has partly softened the tiny prints of what was probably a rabbit. The animal moved in short bursts, then vanished beneath brush near the woodpile. Snow records urgency beautifully. Long leaps, abrupt turns, narrow pauses, all the punctuation of survival. Frontier people became skilled readers of these winter messages. Tracks could tell whether stock had wandered, whether predators were near, whether neighbours or strangers had passed, and whether a path remained usable under new drifts. In remote regions, The ground was not just scenery, it was information. Some hunters could judge direction, pace, and species at a glance. Others knew the age of a trail by how much frost had rounded its edge, or how wind had sifted into it. Historians know these practical reading skills were widespread, though the exact depth of knowledge varied by region, culture, and necessity. Some people read snow almost like text. Others read it more like gossip. Either way, it mattered. You reach for the door bar and lift it slowly. The cabin seems to hold its breath with you. Then you open the door a crack. Cold air slips in at once, clean and sharp enough to make the inside room feel instantly fragile. It smells of pine, frozen earth, and that unmistakable mineral scent of deep snow under morning sky. No smoke, no cooking, no warm wool, just the severe freshness of a landscape that has spent the night remaking itself without consultation. You open the door wider and stand on the threshold. The world is brilliant now in that muted pre-sunrise way, all silver ground and blue shadows. The porch boards are glazed with a thin crust of blown snow that squeaks under your boots when you step out. The sound is almost comically loud in the stillness. Cold this intense changes snow's voice. It no longer slushes or crunches with softness. It squeals, snaps, and complains. Some old-timers claim they could judge the temperature by the sound underfoot alone. That may be partly frontier swagger, but there is truth in it. The air bites your nose and the tops of your cheeks. It feels almost medicinal. You stand there only a moment before the cold begins trying to negotiate with your bones. Yet the sight is worth every sting. The clearing spreads before you with all the composure of a church before service. Snow lies deep against the cabin walls. The woodpile wears a white cap. The pines along the edge glimmer where frost has gathered on needles and bark. Each branch holds a line of light along one side, while the shaded side remains ink dark. It is landscape pared down to essentials, severe and beautiful at once. Closer to the steps, you notice another set of marks, small, rounder than the fox, perhaps a raccoon, though the stride seems odd in the drifted surface. Or maybe a dog once, sometime before the newest powder settled over part of the trail. This is where snow becomes uncertain testimony. It records faithfully, but weather edits freely. Wind softens edges. New flakes obscure depth. Sun, when it appears, changes everything again. The frontier taught humility to anyone too confident in their own deductions. The ground told stories, yes, but never with perfect generosity. You crouch and touch one of the sharper fox prints near the porch edge. The snow around it is dry and feathery at the rim, firmer beneath, like pressing into layers of crushed silk over cold flour. Touching winter directly is always slightly shocking, no matter how many times you do it. The skin registers beauty and danger at once. It is soft, it is abrasive, it is clean, it burns. The frontier offered many such contradictions and expected people to cope without lengthy complaint. Your breath lifts in pale clouds before you. The cabin behind you exhales smoke in a thin line from the chimney, proving that warmth still lives within. That sight pleases you more than it should. A smoking chimney in a frozen landscape carries a message as clear as any flag. Someone is alive in there. Someone has fire, shelter, hot water, and enough order to keep mourning from becoming misery. In isolated places, smoke was a social signal too. Travellers looked for it. Neighbours noted it. The absence of it on a very cold day could provoke uneasy thoughts. There is a peculiar tidbit from frontier winters that suits this scene. In some regions, people watch chimney smoke closely not just for weather but for domestic clues. Straight rising smoke meant calm. Smoke shoved low or sideways foretold changing wind. A lazy, reluctant plume could mean damp wood or a chimney needing attention. Entire little judgments about a household might begin with a glance at the roof. People have always found ways to gossip scientifically. You step down into the snow beside the porch. that comes over the tops of your boots at once. Powder fine on top and denser beneath where older layers have settled. The cold wraps around your ankles like a sudden fist. You do not go far. This is not an hour for heroics. Just a short, careful walk around the immediate edge of the cabin to inspect what the night has done. You move slowly, leaving crisp new footprints that look almost rude across the untouched surface. By the side wall, the deer's prints are even clearer. The animal came close enough that you can see where it pawed and nosed at the drift, perhaps catching scent of stored fodder, spilled salt, or some memory of food left by earlier occupants. Nearby are the tiny linear marks of something dragging a tail, a mouse under the snow perhaps, or a vole making its hidden roots beneath the crust. Winter landscapes have a secret lower level few people think about, while larger creatures print the surface. Smaller ones tunnel under it, warm by comparison, moving in a little roofed roads between roots and grass stems. You find that strangely comforting. Even under all this cold, there is life tucked away. At the corner of the cabin, the wind has sculpted a fresh drift against the logs, curling it upward in a smooth white shoulder almost to the windowsill. The shape is lovely, but practical experience tells you it is also mildly troublesome. Snow piled against a wall steals light, presses damp against timber, and makes the doorway harder to clear if more falls. Frontier mornings often began with shoveling not because anyone enjoyed it, but because yesterday's open space had vanished by sunrise. Winter loved undoing labour and asking for it again. You fetch the shovel from just inside the door and begin to clear the steps and threshold. The work warms you quickly. Snow slides with a dry hiss off the blade. Your breath grows heavier under the scarf. Muscles in your shoulders wake more honestly than they did by the fire. There is satisfaction in this blunt morning labour. Push, lift, toss aside. A little path reappears. The steps take shape. The door can swing more freely. It is not glamorous work, which is another way of saying it is exactly the sort frontier life depended on. Many Western households began mornings with such practical clearing: doorways, paths to wood piles, routes to barns, wells, or privies. Every important destination had to be reclaimed from the storm. If snow was deep enough, the day's first task might simply be making movement possible. Scholars still argue about how much winter isolation shapes settlement patterns long-term in some frontier regions, but there is no question that geography changed seasonally. A road in summer could become a doubtful memory by January. Distance was not fixed. Snow altered it. You lean on the shovel for a moment and look out again over the clearing. The sky is brightening now, pale yellow just above the dark tree line. The blue shadows on the drifts are beginning to fade towards silver. A bird flashes from one pine to another, no more than a quick dark stitch in the cold air. Somewhere unseen, another answers with a brief chirp. Morning has started its slow, careful reopening of the world, not loudly. Winter seldom wastes noise, but steadily enough that the landscape begins to feel less like a held breath and more like a day. You circle once to the back of the cabin, following the narrow zone the wind has partly scoured. There you find another set of tracks, larger than the fox, smaller than the deer, each print softened at the edges. Dog, perhaps, from some earlier time before the freshest drift, or coyote. You crouch to study it, then laugh softly at yourself. This is how legends begin. One uncertain paw print, one confident imagination, and by evening someone is describing a beast the size of a dining table. The frontier was generous in that way. It supplied enough ambiguity for every storyteller to eat well. Still, uncertainty has its charm. Morning makes the wilderness legible, but not fully tame. There are always marks you cannot name. You return to the porch with the shovel and stamp the snow from your boots before going inside. The cabin receives you with a rush of blessed warmth and familiar smells. Smoke, wool, hot iron. The contrast is immediate and delicious. After only a few minutes outside, the room feels almost luxurious again. That, too, was one of winter's stern little gifts. It taught appreciation by force. A simple fire becomes splendid when the doorway opens onto air that bites like this. You set the shovel aside and hold your hands near the hearth. The heat wakes your fingers with that prickly ache that proves you are colder than you admitted. Through the window, the tracks remain visible in the brightening light. A whole census of unseen lives conducted while the cabin glowed through the dark. Deer, fox, birds, perhaps rabbit, perhaps coyote, perhaps something else you missed entirely. The snow holds their passing for now, but sun, wind, and new weather will soon revise the page. That seems fitting. The frontier morning offers evidence, not permanence. You pour more hot water into the cup and stand with it by the window, watching the clearing emerge in fuller detail. Every print outside suggests appetite, caution, movement, and need. Every object inside suggests labour, planning, and shelter. Between them lies the true balance of winter on the frontier. Wild things survive by instinct and adaptation. You survive by firelight, observation, and a small cabin that keeps just enough of the world at bay. In the soft grey birth of morning, both methods look quietly impressive. Morning has fully entered the cabin now, though only in the restrained way winter allows. Light spreads across the floorboards in a pale, patient wash, touching the table, the bed frame, the iron pot, the pegs by the door. It reveals dust in the grain of the wood, soft wear on the rim of the cup, a faint scatter of ash near the hearth. Nothing looks grander by daylight. It looks truer, and truth, in a place like this, has its own clean beauty. You stand in the middle of the room with the cup warming your hands and take stock. That is how a frontier day often began, not with inspiration, with inventory. Fire still good, water heating, door cleared, boots sound, blanket dry, wood remaining, food enough for now. These small reckonings gave structure to life in remote winters. Before any larger plan could exist, the basics had to be counted and confirmed. A person who ignored the condition of ordinary things might discover by noon that the day had quietly turned against them. You set the cup down and move first to the hearth. The logs from the night are partly spent, their blackened shells collapsing inward around a thick bed of live coals. You stir them gently and add 2 fresh splits, then kneel to blow once at the base where orange still glows. Ash lifts in a faint grey cloud. The fire answers with a brighter line of flame, then another. There is deep satisfaction in coaxing a fire upward after it has nearly settled into silence. It feels less like starting over and more like continuing a conversation properly. The room brightens with it. Heat begins to press outward again in slow, invisible layers. The kettle ticks softly. The nearest boards grow warm enough underfoot to take the sting off the morning. Outside, through the frosted glass, the clearing shines white and sharp under the rising day. Inside, your little circle of work resumes. The frontier was full of tasks that had to be done daily, whether anyone felt poetic about them or not. The weather did not pause because you were tired. Bread did not bake itself. Water did not carry itself. Wood did not split out of respect for your mood. You gather the bedding next. The blanket on the mattress has kept its warmth surprisingly well, though the far edge feels cool where the room's night chill lingered. You fold the top layer neatly, then shake out the coverlet and smooth it flat with both hands. Dust rises very slightly in the slanted light. Beds on the frontier were not always private places used only for sleep. During the day they might serve as seating, storage, sick bed, nursery, sewing station, or general platform for whatever needed a clean raised surface. In a one-room cabin, furniture had to be versatile or accept being resented. That practical economy shaped everything. A stool could become a table. A chest could become a bench. A coat could become a pillow. A ropeline could become a wardrobe. When space is limited, imagination becomes part of housekeeping. Historians have often pointed out that frontier domestic life required constant spatial negotiation, though the old popular image preferred to focus on outdoor action. Yet much of survival happened through quiet arrangements indoors, where every object had to justify its place, and every task had to fit around every other one without chaos taking the room hostage. You open the wooden box again and take out the sewing things. A loose thread has appeared at the cuff of your shirt, nothing urgent, but exactly the sort of small weakness that turns annoying when ignored. So you sit by the window where daylight is best and thread the needle carefully, wetting the end between your fingers, squinting once when the eye of the needle proves more opinionated than necessary. Then you make the repair with small practical stitches, in and out, turning the fabric between thumb and forefinger. This sort of work calms the mind. It narrows the world to hand size. A seam thread, a useful result. In winter, that scale can feel deeply reassuring. Frontier households lived by maintenance. Clothes, harness, sacks, quilts, mittens, aprons, shirts, tickings, curtains. Sacks again because sacks wore out with insulting enthusiasm. All needed regular attention. A woman skilled with a needle could stretch a family's comfort far beyond what new goods might allow, and men often mended as well when necessity pressed hard enough. The West had many divisions of labour, but winter had a habit of making competence more important than pride. You bite the thread clean and hold the cuff up to inspect it. Good enough. Better than before. The repair leaves a slightly darker line where the cloth has worn thin from use. That feels honest. The whole cabin is full of such honesty. Worn places, patched things, useful compromises. Modern decorative taste often tries very hard to imitate the look of hard use without accepting any of the inconvenience, which is an extremely human sort of vanity. Here, there is no pretense. If something is worn, it is because it has worked. You set the sewing things aside and turn to breakfast. Nothing elaborate. A little more bread warmed near the hearth, some pork crisped in the pan, hot water for tea. The simple activity changes the air at once. Soon the smell of warming fat moves through the cabin again, followed by a toasted grain scent as the bread browns lightly at the edge. The sounds are equally comforting. A mild sizzle, the soft knock of cup against table, the scrape of knife on board. Morning meals in remote places had enormous emotional value because they turned survival back into routine. You were not merely enduring the cold now, you were living a day in it. There is a quaint old notion from rural winters that a well-fed person feels the weather less. That is not scientifically elegant, but it contains practical truth. Food meant heat, energy, better judgment, and a smaller chance of staring resentfully at the horizon while making poor decisions. Frontier breakfasts often leaned hearty for good reason. Salt pork, beans, bread, porridge, coffee, biscuits, gravy when available. Sometimes pie because the pie was there and life was already difficult enough without refusing pie in the morning. You approve of that philosophy. The tea steeps while you eat, darkening gradually in the cup. You stand for a while rather than sit, turning once to check the fire, then once more to look out the window at the bright clearing. Nothing moves now. The tracks remain, but the creatures themselves have gone to ground or to some quieter errand among the trees. Sunlight, weak and low, has begun touching the upper branches of the pines, where frost catches and flashes in little silver threads. You think of the work beyond the cabin door. There is always more. There always was. That may be the defining truth of frontier life, especially in winter. Survival was not a problem solved once and admired from a chair. It was a chain of modest tasks, each one connected to the next. Clear the threshold so the door opens freely. Bring in wood so the fire can hold. Melt snow so there is water. Dry the boots so feet remain useful. Mend the shirt so skin stays covered. Keep food sealed so mice do not celebrate. Sweep ash from the hearth so coals behave. Repeat with minor variations until spring. You take the broom from beside the door and sweep the floor lightly, guiding ash, crumbs, and tracked bits of snowmelt grit into a neat little pile. Sweeping in a small cabin matters more than outsiders might guess. dirt multiplies quickly in close quarters. Ash drifts. Food bits attract creatures with entrepreneurial instincts. Damp patches linger and sour the air. A clean floor is not vanity. It is another form of order. And order is one of the few luxuries fully available even in hardship. The broom whispers across the boards. Soft, rhythmic, satisfying. Sunlight catches each pass. There is something nearly ceremonial about it. You empty the sweepings into the hearth where appropriate, then wipe the table with a damp cloth warmed from the kettle. The wood darkens briefly and smells richer where the damp brings up the grain. The cup is rinsed, the spoon dried, the knife wiped and returned to its place. This kind of domestic choreography often goes unnoticed in grand histories, yet it underpinned everything else. Military campaigns, cattle drives, mining ventures, land claims, and rail expansions all depended somewhere, somehow, on someone keeping rooms, clothes, bodies, and tools functional enough for another day of effort. You move next to the axe by the door. The handle is dry and smooth where many hands have gripped it. You run your palm along the grain, checking for splinters or hairline cracks. None. Good. Then you inspect the bit. It could use a touch of sharpening. Not badly, but enough to deserve attention before need becomes nuisance. So you take the whetstone from the box, sit near the window again, and work the edge with small, steady strokes. Stone against metal makes a hush like distant sand. The repetitive motion is almost meditative. Tools invite respect when weather is harsh. A sharp axe saves energy. A dull one steals it. The difference matters. Many frontier skills were essentially about conserving effort. A good edge, a well-fitted boot, seasoned wood, organised supplies, a patched mitten, a tight latch. Each saved a little labour, each reduced a little risk. Together they made the difference between a manageable winter day and one that felt like pushing a wagon uphill through oatmeal. This is not the glamorous side of history, but it is one of the most persuasive. Civilizations rest on maintenance far more than they rest on speeches. You test the blade carefully with your thumb, not touching the edge itself, only sensing its finer line. Better. You set the axe back by the door and pull on your coat. Time to bring in more wood before the sun climbs higher, and the path softens only in appearance while staying just as cold underfoot. You step outside with the hatchet and armful sling, and the air hits you with that same crisp severity as before, though now the light gives it a more cheerful face. The clearing sparkles under full morning sun. Blue shadows still lie in the drifts, but the upper snow gleams almost white gold. Your earlier shovel path makes the trip to the woodpile easier, though each step still sinks slightly. The wood itself is stacked in careful ranks under a simple covering, split ends facing out like little pale shields. You choose pieces by feel and judgment, taking a mix of sizes, thick logs for endurance, smaller ones for quick catching. This, too, is a kind of literacy. A person learns to look at wood and see future hours. One log, in particular, gives off that sweet, dry pine scent the moment you lift it. A good piece. You approve. You carry the load back inside and stack it neatly near the hearth, bark to one side, cut ends outward. Even this pile has a visual pleasure to it. Firewood arranged well looks like competence made visible. Frontier households treated stored fuel with a seriousness outsiders sometimes mistake for obsession. Yet in a winter like this, wood was time, heat, food, and safety all at once. To admire a stacked row of dry logs was simply rational affection. Back indoors, you remove your gloves and rub your hands before the blaze. The cabin takes you back immediately. Warmth on the knuckles, smoke in the nose, wool at the neck. The tea is still warm enough to finish, and you do so while standing by the table, watching sunlight move gradually across the floor. Morning labour has changed the room. It feels more awake now, more ordered, ready to carry a day rather than merely survive a night. A curious scholarly debate comes to mind. Historians still differ on how much isolation in frontier cabins fostered boredom versus contentment. Because sources swing wildly between complaint and affection. Some letters present rural winter life as numbing monotony. Others recall it as a season of peace, domestic skill, reading, music, and closeness. The likely truth, as ever, is mixed, much dependent on health, resources, family harmony, weather, and temperament. A cheerful person with enough flour can be astonishingly philosophical. A miserable person with damp boots, less so. You find this both funny and deeply fair. The morning continues in this spirit. You refill the kettle, rearrange the shelf, check the mouse vulnerable places near the sack of beans, and move the food a little higher. You fold the blanket you wore through the night and place it within easy reach but not in the path of sparks. Every task is minor. Collectively they make the cabin feel capable. That may be the hidden reward of housekeeping in hard times. It turns a structure into an ally. At the door, you pause and look back across the room. Fire steady, table clean, tools in place, bed smoothed, water hot, wood brought in, clothing mended, breakfast finished, sunlight across the boards. Nothing extraordinary has happened. And yet the morning feels full, because ordinary labour has a way of anchoring the spirit when winter tries to scatter it. This is how endurance is built. Not all at once, not through speeches, through repeated acts so modest they can be missed entirely by anyone who has never needed them. A fed fire, a cleared step, a sharpened blade, a stitched cuff, a swept floor, dry boot, a warm drink. You stand there in the pale winter light, held between the white world outside and the working warmth within, and feel the quiet dignity of these tasks settle around you. On the frozen frontier, life is sustained less by dramatic victories than by this careful string of useful actions, each one keeping the cabin alive and keeping you, with it, steady against the cold. By late day, the light has already begun its quiet retreat. Winter is economical with daylight, handing it out in pale measured portions and reclaiming it before you have quite finished admiring the snow. The cabin feels warmer now for having been worked in all morning. Firewood rests in tidy ranks near the hearth. The table is clear except for the cup and spoon. The bed is made. The floor has been swept. Every useful thing has returned to its place. And because of that, the room carries a deep, settled calm that no grand furnishing could improve. You stand by the window and watch the clearing ease toward evening. The sun is lower now, and the snow no longer shines white. It glows softly with tones of silver, pearl, and faint rose where the light catches the smoother drifts. Blue shadows have lengthened between the trees. Frost on the pine branches flashes less brightly than before, becoming a cool, dim shimmer instead. Nothing moves in the open. The tracks from the night and morning have softened a little at the edges, where the weak sun touched them, but they remain legible enough to suggest a whole hidden world still going about its business. You have spent a full cycle with this cabin now, not merely passing through, living with it, learning its sounds, its drafts, its comforts, its stern little requirements. That's one of the quietest rewards of remote shelter. A strange place becomes familiar not through ownership, but through attention. You know which floorboard speaks near the hearth. You know how the shutter answers when the wind leans from the north side. You know how much warmth the bed keeps, where the kettle sits best, how the fire likes its logs arranged at night. Such knowledge would have been ordinary to frontier people. To them, this was not charm, it was competence. Still, competence has a kind of beauty. Especially in winter, you add another split log to the fire and watch it catch. The flames rise with more gold than red now, lively again in the deepening room. The scent of pine sap returns, fresh and sweet at first, then richer as the bark darkens. Warmth rolls across your shins and hands. Beyond the reach of the hearth, the room remains cool enough to remind you that the cold outside has not gone anywhere. It is waiting with patient confidence, knowing night will strengthen its claim. But you are ready for night now in a different way than before. Preparedness changes the mood completely. At first, a wild winter cabin can feel like an experiment. by evening if you have worked properly, where it feels like a small republic of order. That may be why the end of day on the frontier often carried such satisfaction, not because the labour was over, since it rarely was, but because the visible work of the day had accumulated into security. Water heated, wood brought in, path cleared, clothing dried, food managed, tools checked. A person could look around and see the shape of effort turned into comfort. There is immense peace in that. Modern life often hides the link between labour and ease. A cabin in winter makes the link glow. You decide on a simple supper, something warm and steady rather than ambitious. Bread, the last of the pork, and a little tea again because the room seems to invite it. Soon the pan murmurs on the hearth. Fat releases its savoury smell into the air. The bread toasts at the edges and gives off that humble rich scent that can make a room feel fuller than it is. The kettle sends up steam with a faint metallic hush. The whole cabin smells edible and deeply human. You eat slowly, seated at the table this time, watching the last daylight thin beyond the frosted pane. The meal is plain, yet every bite feels earned and therefore better than many elaborate ones. Frontier food had a talent for that. It rarely impressed by complexity. It impressed by timing, warmth, and reliability. When cold rules the landscape, simple hot food begins to look like one of civilization's highest achievements. Historians write about settlement, expansion, conflict, and commerce, as they should. But perhaps they should occasionally pause to honour the emotional importance of a hot supper in a small winter room. It solves more than hunger. It quiets the mind. When the cup is empty and the last crumbs have been gathered up, you clear the table at once. Another small frontier principle. Finish the task while it is still small. Tomorrow has enough waiting for it already. You rinse the cup, wipe the spoon, fold the cloth over the remaining bit of bread, and hang it higher from the pegs. The motions are easy now, almost automatic. The cabin has taught you its habits in a single day, because winter gives sharp lessons and does not charge separately for them. Outside, the forest darkens by degrees. First the trunks go black, then the spaces between them deepen, then the clearing itself becomes more suggestion than shape. You light the candle again, and its glow joins the firelight in turning the room amber. Instantly, the indoors separate itself from the outdoors in a more dramatic way. The window becomes a dark mirror edged in frost. The walls draw close with quiet intimacy. The table, the stool, the wooden box, the fiddle, the pegs by the door, all seem to gather themselves into the circle of light like familiar companions taking their places for the night watch. There is no need for cards now, nor music, nor even the almanac. The room itself is enough. You sit near the hearth with the blanket around your shoulders and let stillness do its work. The coals shift softly. The kettle hums. Once in a while, a beam gives a small dry click as the temperature outside falls again. These sounds no longer feel mysterious. They feel domestic. Even the occasional faint rustle in the wall has lost its power to suggest anything more dramatic than a mouse conducting perfectly ordinary business. Familiarity is a wonderful maker of peace. You think about how many people must have ended winter days in just this manner. Not in this exact cabin, perhaps, but in rooms much like it. 1,000 little islands of firelight scattered across distant valleys and rough settlements, each holding back the same cold, each shaped by the same cycle of labour and quiet. Some evenings carried loneliness, no doubt. Some brought family noise, fretful children, mending, prayers, songs, or hard conversations about weather and supplies. Yet underneath those variations was the same shared rhythm. Survive the day, prepare the night, keep the room warm, keep hope plain and serviceable. There is something dignified in such repetition. Not glamorous, not loud, very durable. You rise and make the last practical checks. Extra wood within reach, boots placed well, coat folded near the bed, kettle topped up, door bar secure, shutter latch firm, food tucked away, fire arranged for a long, steady burn rather than quick, bright show. It is almost like setting a stage. except the performance required is simply a safe night. Frontier households became expert stagehands for this most essential of productions. Everything in its place, nothing forgotten, no needless drama. The bed looks welcoming now in the candle and fire glow. Its blankets hold a muted warmth from the room. The pillow, if one can grant such a noble title to folded cloth and practical optimism, looks entirely sufficient. You sit on the edge for a moment and feel the mattress settle under you with a soft rustle. Lumpy still, certainly. But after a full day and night in the cabin, it has acquired character. That is another human trick. Endure a thing long enough, and it begins to feel less like inconvenience and more like personality. You smile and stand again, not ready quite yet to lie down. Instead, you return to the window one last time. Outside, twilight has almost disappeared. The clearing lies under a faint wash of moonlit snow again, simpler and colder with every minute. The tracks are dim now, blurred into shadow and pale ridges. The trees at the edge hold their silence. Somewhere far out, too far to trouble the cabin, an owl calls once. The sound hangs in the dark like a dropped bead of water, then vanishes. That single note seems to complete the scene rather than interrupt it. You place your hand near the glass without touching it. No need to borrow that cold again. The contrast says enough. Inside, warmth brushes your back from the hearth. Outside, night resumes its huge white stillness. The cabin stands between them like a modest stubborn thought, not powerful in a grand sense, not capable of dominating the wilderness, but capable of sheltering one human life through one severe winter night, and then another, provided the person inside respects the bargain. That bargain may be the truest thing about frontier life. Nature sets the terms. Human beings answer with craft, habit, endurance, and a bit of humility. The candle flame bends slightly as you pass, then steadies. You lower yourself onto the bed and pull the blanket across your lap first, enjoying its weight before you fully settle in. The wool smells faintly of smoke and clean dryness. Your boots are ready for morning. The cup is clean. The room is ordered. The fire is sound. Every small defence against discomfort has been prepared. That knowledge softens the body in a way heat alone cannot. Safety is not just warmth. It is readiness. You ease down at last and let the blanket come up around your shoulders. The mattress shifts beneath you, less lumpy than your memory insists. Firelight pulses softly across the rafters. The candle adds its patient little pool of gold from the table. Wind moves at the edges of the cabin, but more gently now, as if even the weather has accepted the hour. Your hands, warm at last, rest easily over the blanket. Your breathing slows. The room seems to breathe with you, and now the night can soften. The fire settles into a long quiet glow. The kettle releases an occasional sigh. Somewhere in the wall, some tiny unseen life continues its own harmless business. None of it disturbs you. It all belongs. The cabin has become not merely a place to escape the cold, but a place with its own rhythm of reassurance. Each object holds still. Each shadow stays kind. Each sound has found its proper distance. You listen, not for danger now, just for the simple company of a winter room at rest. The wind combs lightly through the pines beyond the clearing. The chimney murmurs under its breath. Wood shifts inward in a sleepy little collapse of coals. The dark outside remains immense, but it no longer feels empty. Snow covers the ground in patient folds. Trees keep their watch. The sky hangs clear and cold above the roof. Inside, the cabin answers with warmth, amber light, and the faint comforting scent of pine smoke caught in wool. Your eyes grow heavier. The room grows gentler. Everything unneeded slips away. You no longer think of distance or weather records, or the hard arithmetic of frontier survival. You think only of the blanket's weight, the steady glow at the hearth, the hush beyond the walls, and the quiet miracle of having enough fire, enough shelter, enough food, enough order, enough peace for sleep to arrive without struggle. So you let the night take on its softest shape. The candle burns lower, calm and watchful. Firelight gathers along the stones and lowers itself into red. The corners of the room blur kindly. The cold remains outside where it belongs for now, pressing against timber and shutter, unable to enter except as a distant idea. The cabin holds you in its rough, simple care, and the great winter wilderness, for all its severity, becomes only a silent presence beyond the glass. The last thing you notice is the warmth at your feet and the low breathing sound of the fire. Then even that begins to drift. The room loosens. The dark grows velvety. The whole long day, from first arrival to this quiet bed, settles over you like another blanket, heavier than wool and gentler than thought. In that stillness, with the old cabin standing firm and the snow bright under the moon, you begin at last to sink fully into rest. Now the fire is only glow, not flame, and the glow is enough. The walls hold, the roof holds, the night holds, and you, at last, let go. For a little while longer, the cabin remains softly awake around you. The hearth gives off a mellow warmth that spreads low across the floorboards. The kettle no longer sings, only rests with a faint lingering heat. Outside, the pines move so slightly that their sound becomes almost indistinguishable from silence. Snow lies over the clearing like folded linen, smooth and pale under the moon. Nothing asks anything more of you. Your breathing slows to match the room. The blanket settles closer. The darkness becomes tender. There is no need now to keep watch. No need to count wood or listen for every shift in the wind. The labour of the day has been completed with care, and the night has accepted your preparations. Around you, the cabin seems to relax into its own old stillness. Timbers quiet, shadows soft, every useful object returned to rest. Even the cold beyond the walls feels less hostile in this final hour, more distant than severe, part of the vast sleeping world rather than an enemy pressing near. You rest in that feeling, a rough bed, a warm hearth, a sky full of winter above the roof, the sort of peace that asks for nothing except that you sink into it. And so the room dims further, the embers draw inward, and the pale window holds only moonlight on frost. The clearing outside disappears once more into soft silver blur. The forest keeps its secrets, the old cabin keeps its warmth, and you drift down through the last quiet layers of thought, held by firelight, timber, wool, and the patient hush of snow. Sleep comes gently now. It comes the way dawn came by degrees, slowly, softly, until there is no longer any difference between the warmth around you and the calm within you.